Chapter 1, in which plans are made. Potter Manor. June 26, 1994. Just before dawn, Harry Black awoke to the gentle ringing of a soft bell. He found himself in a very large room, which was to be expected, but still mildly surprising. The master bedroom of Potter Manor was the biggest bedroom Harry had ever seen, and now it was his and his alone. For a boy who had spent his formative years sleeping on a ratty mattress in a cupboard, it was somewhat intimidating. He wondered what the first Lord Potter to stay here had done with his lady that required a bedroom this large. Then he sneered at the thought of Lord and Lady Potter, even if it was about Potters long since dead. Annoyed at himself for sneering, he recognized it as yet another side effect of the oath of enmity his godfather, Sirius Black, had impulsively sworn against Harry's birth family. About 3 months prior, Harry's cleverness, Peter Pettigrew's duplicity, and James Potter's ineptitude had conspired to land him an 18-year lease on Potter Manor. He had been sleeping in the cavernous master bedroom for several nights now. While he expected to enjoy his time on this palatial estate, he was already tired of battling a vague sense of constant supernatural annoyance every time he was reminded of who had originally owned the place. Okay, he thought irritably. I definitely need to change the name of the place if I'm going to stay here. But to what? Wilkes Manor? The Black House? Harry's hideaway. Harry's thoughts were interrupted by a cheerful salutation from the one who had been ringing the bell to wake him. Good morning, Master Harry, sir, said Dobby. The time is 5:45 in the morning. You are scheduled to meet with Master Theo out on the veranda in 15 minutes for your morning constitutional, followed by breakfast in the solarium is at 8:30 in the morning. Miss Amaryllis, Master Sirius, and Master Regulus will be joining you both. Dobby snapped his fingers, and a pair of running shorts, a t-shirt, trainers, and socks appeared on Harry's bed. Harry sighed. His morning routine included a brisk 2-mile jog around the grounds, followed by calisthenics and basic wushido training with his dear friend, Theo No Name. Theo had been encouraging him to exercise regularly, which Harry had thought was a good idea at the time. In an ill-considered move, he had instructed Dobby to ensure he woke up every morning for his run with Theo, ignoring any requests to sleep in unless Theo approved it. Unfortunately, Theo had embraced the role of Harry's personal trainer with enthusiasm, as Harry's still sore muscles could confirm. Master Harry's luncheon will be at noon, Dobby continued. However, Master Harry's solicitor will arrive at 11:30 to discuss some house business before the other guests arrive. Thank you, Dobby, Harry replied, heading into the EN suite to use the facilities before changing. While washing his hands, he studied his reflection for a moment. Leaning in closer, he focused on his green eyes. After about 10 seconds, he exhaled loudly and shook his head before leaving. In the hall, Theo was already waiting for him, a smirk on his face. You are way too cheerful to be a Slytherin, Harry remarked. Come on. Theo laughed. This will be good for you. Why is it that people only say this will be good for you when they're talking about something unpleasant? Harry asked sourly as he followed Theo down the hall. Outside on the front lawn, he was surprised to see that someone had decided to join them for their early morning run. The grounds were alive with activity. Archie Goodwin, the American wizard recently hired by Sirius as both his personal bodyguard and Harry's dueling coach, joined them. He hailed from New York, as his accent revealed, and had trained at Ilvermorny, specializing in defense. In his mid-20s, Archie was a Muggle-raised half-blood, evident from how comfortable he looked in a Muggle tracksuit. However, that was all a facade. Archie Goodwin was the latest alias of Regulus Black. As a metamorphomagus, Reg had become accustomed to changing his appearance every time he entered the wizarding world. But now that he and Sirius had moved into Potter Manor, and with numerous guests expected over the summer, Reg could no longer walk around with the face of an ex-Death Eater who was officially deceased. He had taken the name from a book he read while in Australia titled The Lead of Frightened Men. His current appearance was loosely based on the Lazarus White identity he'd maintained for years, a look he felt comfortable keeping indefinitely. This face was one he had created himself, rather than modeled after someone he had seen in a film or a newspaper. Reg changed his hair and eye colors just in case someone familiar with Lazarus White was around Britain, and he adjusted his age to reflect how he looked when he first moved to Australia 14 years ago. "Good morning, lads. Ready for some exercise?" he called out. "I didn't like Lockhart's creepy cheerfulness the first time, Reg," Harry replied dryly. "Ha-ha." Reg responded with the fake Lockhart laugh that had annoyed Harry throughout his second year. "It's just before dawn and we're about to go jogging, Harry," he added playfully. "It won't get any more enjoyable if we're dour about it." One long, sweaty run later, Theo began reviewing basic wushy-do techniques. Katas with his friend. While Harry could perform the katas reasonably well, since they were all water-based moves and he was a Slytherin, he still felt uncomfortable and a bit silly engaging in martial arts, even magical ones. As he had said from the start, any wizard who gets caught without a wand deserves what happens to him. Regulus seemed equally skeptical. "So tell me again, Theo. What's the purpose of these movements?" "They're to train the body to channel magic internally so that one can perform physical actions enhanced by magic. This one I'm doing now, for example, can make my body more limber and make it easier to dodge." "Oh," Regulus said, pulling out his wand. "Would you care to demonstrate?" Theo thought for a moment and then nodded. He turned to face his former defense against the dark arts instructor and assumed a relaxed pose. Regulus flicked his wand, sending a stinging hex aimed at Theo's chest. Instantly, Theo twisted his body at the waist while leaning to one side, and the hex sailed by, missing him by inches. Intrigued, Regulus sent for more stinging hexes, each faster than the one before. Theo dodged the first three by contorting his body in increasingly twisted and vaguely serpentine ways, but the fourth one hit. "Oh," Theo hissed. "Yeah, I'm still kind of a novice, but that's the general principle." "Still, dodging 4 out of 5 hexes is a good average," Regulus said reassuringly. "Maybe," Harry replied, "but you also weren't going all out to hit him. I mean, I've seen you duel auras and move faster than that. Not to mention that one time you and I duelled when I still thought you were Lockhart." "True, but the attacks I just made were quite fast and accurate compared to what you'll see from a novice-level duelist in Marseilles. More importantly, from what I've observed so far, Wushido wouldn't count as illegal magic if you used it to dodge an attack." "Hall." "That sounds good," Artie replied. Harry continued, "After that, we can discuss our plans for the day." Sirius nodded in agreement. "I hope you all are ready for some serious training." Hestia smiled. "We are. I've heard great things about your progress, Harry." "Thanks," Harry said, feeling a mix of pride and nerves. As they moved toward the study, Harry felt a surge of determination. He was ready to prove himself. Once in the master's study, Harry settled into a chair across from Artie. "Let's go over the strategy for the dueling circuit in Marseilles," Artie began. "We need to ensure you're fully prepared." Harry listened intently, eager to learn everything he could. The master's study. As Artie entered the master's study, he noticed a few changes since his last visit 6 months ago. Most notably, a large banner now hung above the mantel, displaying the crest of Slytherin House. "Is that your way of thumbing your nose at the notoriously Gryffindorish Potter family?" Artie asked with amusement. "Indirectly," Harry replied. "Underneath it is the Potter family crest, which not even Dobby can remove. So I decided to just cover it up instead. Probably wise. Okay, first things first." Artie set his briefcase down on the desk and pulled out a small box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal an onyx ring. The ring was silver, and Harry noticed that when the light hit the stone just right, a faint stylized W in Gothic script appeared within it. "The Wilkes Lord ring," the solicitor said. "You can examine it, but don't put it on yet." "You're sure it's safe?" Harry asked, eyeing the ring that had last been worn by Erasmus Mr. Toymaker Wilkes. "Quite safe. In fact, the ministry insisted that their curse breakers examine it and clear it of its more exotic enchantments." However, it will still deliver a nasty jolt to anyone who puts it on without first being sworn in as Lord of the House, which is standard for a Lord's ring. You'll put it on after taking your vow in August. But I wanted to show it to you first. Harry took the ring and examined it closely. He noticed writing engraved on the inside in a cursive Latin script. "What's this writing?" he asked. "That's the Wilkes family motto, Vive ut cras moriturus. Live as if you will die tomorrow." Harry made a face. "Am I allowed to change the family motto to something less morbid?" "Not easily. But you're free to not use it outside of a few special occasions. It's on the crest and the ring, though." Artie opened his briefcase and took out a few sheets of parchment. "And while we're on the subject of your Lord's ring, you have a decision to make." "Oh. As I mentioned, the Ministry purged the ring of the illegal enchantments. That leaves 3 spell slots available for replacement enchantments." "What were the spells that got taken off?" Harry asked, curious. "One could poison any drink with a touch of your finger. Another allowed you to manipulate the outcome of dice rolls, which the toymaker apparently used to cheat in Muggle casinos. The last one could deliver an electrical shock to anyone whose hand you shook." "What, like a joy buzzer?" Harry then explained the concept of a Muggle joy buzzer to Artie. "Yes, rather like that. Except the strength of the shock ranged from painful but harmless to instantly lethal." Harry grimaced. "I can see why the Ministry would disapprove. What would you recommend?" Artie handed over the parchment. "Here are all the spells we can get inscribed into the ring by a reputable enchanter without drawing Ministry scrutiny. Read over them and let me know what you prefer. I'll have your ring ready by August. There are about 40 options, so give it some thought." "Sure thing," Harry replied as he glanced at the list. "Okay, right off the bat, I'll take the very first one." Artie chuckled. "The animagus detection field?" "Yes, I thought that one would pique your interest." And it did. After all, it had only been a few months since the last time an animagus had tried to kill him. The drawing room. "So that's where we are with your financials, Lord Black." "Serious, please." Hestia sighed. It was the 3rd time her employer had tried to establish a more familiar relationship with her since the meeting began. "You're very kind, Lord Black. But with all due respect, I would prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional. And as a young unmarried woman in the employ of someone such as yourself, strictly professionals means that I call you Lord Black." "Yes, Lord Black," she said. "Someone who is good-looking, fantastically wealthy, publicly notorious, an older man but not scandalously so, and..." She paused. "And?" Sirius prompted. "If you'll forgive my impertinence, Lord Black, I hope your experiences since Hogwarts, as awful as some of them were, have led you to some maturity. But frankly, you had a reputation during your Hogwarts days regarding how you treated women. I have no intention of becoming one of your conquests. It's bad enough that half of Wizarding Britain will assume that I am just for representing you." Sirius frowned at the accusation. "Did we go to school together?" "I started during your 6th year," she replied. "Well then. You can't judge me based on scandalous rumors spread by jealous older students. One of those jealous older students, Lord Black, was my sister, Gwenob Jones," Hestia added coolly. "I'm told you kept her underwear as a souvenir." Sirius's face flushed. He recalled his drunken one-night stand with the captain of the Hufflepuff Quidditch team and future star of the Holyhead Harpies. He was also reminded of Regulus's accusation from the year before, that after his breakup with Marlene Kinnan, he had turned into a pansexual libertine. He realized, to his embarrassment, that he had, in fact, been trying to flirt with his seneschal, a capable and highly professional witch who had every right to expect a purely professional working relationship. "My apologies, Madam Jones. It won't happen again. Please continue with your report." She nodded. "As I was saying, here's where we are. After consolidating all the outstanding vaults from deceased relatives, your net worth is estimated at just over 78 million galleons, making you the 2nd wealthiest individual wizard in Britain, behind a Dramel XL1. A full listing of all magical artifacts from the last anyone heard, Regulus was killed? How could he still be alive? Sirius nodded. That's what we need to find out. There are rumors and some leads, but nothing concrete yet. Hestia frowned. If Regulus is alive, that changes everything. He was a Death Eater. We need to proceed carefully. Agreed, Sirius said. Archie, I want you to look into his last known whereabouts and any potential connections he might have had since then. Understood, Archie replied, taking notes. Hestia added, and I'll assist with any resources you might need from the Ministry. We can gather intelligence discreetly. Perfect, Sirius said. The sooner we get to the bottom of this, the better. They continued discussing their plans, each aware of the implications of Regulus Black's possible return. A Death Eater? Sirius finished. Apparently not. He was set to take the Dark Mark at our parents' insistence when he disappeared. I had assumed he was killed, but I recently learned that Arcturus Black had left him a secret vault and the means to fake his own death if he changed his mind about serving you-know-who. I also discovered that the vault was accessed in 1979, around the time Regulus supposedly died. Upon learning that, I suddenly realized that no one really seemed to know how Regulus died. A spell of some kind. Yes, Archie said. A very obscure and possibly illegal spell which, in this case, was used to make most people assume that Regulus Black was dead without thinking about it very much. That sounds like a Fidelius. Conceptually, but this isn't nearly as powerful. Apparently, if someone comes across even weak evidence that Regulus never died, they can suddenly see right through the deception. Just asking questions about how the person died can be enough to do so. Which is why I want this handled quietly, Sirius said. I don't know for sure if Regulus is still alive, but if he's stayed out of trouble and is living a decent life, I don't want to expose him and bring the Death Eaters down on him. Nor do I want to get him in trouble with the law for things he did when he was barely 17 and has repented of. Hestia nodded. So what do you need from me? If Archie can track down Regulus and he wants to come back, I'll need you to lay the legal groundwork for having him declared alive and also get him cleared for anything he may have done as a Death Eater. Given his age at the time, that shouldn't be a problem. Unless he murdered someone on a raid or something equally serious, I suppose. Archie's eye twitched once, but he said nothing. Later at lunch, just before noon, Harry's other guests arrived, Penelope Clearwater, Bobby Latimer, and Titus Mitchell. Harry's guests included Penelope Clearwater, Bobby Latimer, and Titus Mitchell. All three had been head girl, head boy, and Slytherin prefect during the previous school year. Penny was a Muggle-raised half-blood, while Bobby was a Muggle-born. They both seemed awestruck by the manor house of an ancient and noble family. Titus, also a half-blood, had been raised in a mostly wizarding family and did a good job of acting indifferent. He was the only one of the three who wore wizarding robes instead of Muggle's semi-formal attire. Lunch took place in the main dining hall, but instead of the long table, a smaller round one was set up. Buttercup, the house elf in charge of the kitchen, had prepared an excellent three-course lunch menu. Although Harry had only been there for a week, he was already quite fond of Buttercup. Dobby had explained to her that Master Harry enjoyed cooking as a hobby. Once she got past the absurdity of a wizard wanting to cook, she embraced the role of cooking instructor with enthusiasm. During Harry's cooking sessions, Buttercup was stern and surprisingly sassy, her mannerisms reminiscent of a mix between McGonagall and Snape, scaled down to 3 feet tall. After lunch, everyone moved to a sitting room where Archie led the conversation by asking the 3 applicants about their time at Hogwarts and their favorite subjects. Titus, unsurprisingly for a Slytherin, was fond of potions and had taken first place in that class. He was also quite good at transfiguration, though he amiably conceded that Bobby was better. Penelope spoke enthusiastically about her interest in arithmancy and ancient runes, having topped her class in both those subjects as well as charms. Bobby also excelled in charms and transfiguration, but his favorite class was defense against the dark arts. The Hufflepuff admitted somewhat sheepishly that his least favorite class was the one taught by his head of house. Allergies typically left him leaving herbology lessons with red eyes, clogged sinuses, and sometimes an itchy rash. This did not stop him from continuing the class through his newts, but he had no plans to pursue a job involving plants. This naturally led to a question about the career goals of the three applicants, and they exchanged nervous glances. "Ministry job, if I can get it," Titus said somewhat glumly. "The same, I guess," Bobby replied quietly. "If my newts are good enough." "Your newts will be fine, Latimer," Titus scoffed. "Fine's not good enough. They'll need to be spectacular to make up for." Bobby trailed off, blushing slightly. Penelope shrugged. "To be honest, my family is still debating whether to emigrate sometime next year." Sirius nodded at their answers. "If you'll forgive me for being blunt, Mr. Latimer, can I assume you were going to say that your newts will need to be spectacular to make up for being a Muggle-born?" The young man hesitated before nodding. "I'm not naive, Lord Black. I've understood since my sorting that many wizards and witches would look down on me for being a Muggle-born. But I still believe that if I work hard enough, I could overcome it. But now..." Bobby paused and swallowed. "I looked it up. I am the first Muggle-born to be chosen as head boy since 1946. And I am also the first head boy since then to not have a job of his choice waiting for him immediately after graduation. Penelope and Titus are in the same situation. From what I've learned, every pureblood head boy and head girl for the last 10 years has actually been recruited by the ministry starting at the beginning of their last year, as have all the pureblood prefects. The ones who didn't go straight into the ministry, usually in a prestigious starting post, were the ones who could turn down job offers or take a job in the private sector." He let out a quiet laugh. "I, on the other hand, never received a single owl." "Are you interested in a mastery, Mr. Latimer?" Artie asked. Maybe. Either defense against the dark arts or transfiguration. But what I'm really interested in is politics. Unfortunately, it's hard enough to find a master willing to take on an apprentice who can't afford to pay him, let alone get a foothold in Wizengamot politics as a Muggle-born from a poor family. Right now, I'm just hoping for a job that will let me save some money to perhaps pay for a mastery later. "I think we can help you with that, Latimer," Harry said with a smile. Artie continued, "The job we're offering you, all three of you, in fact, is initially short-term. Lord Wilkes has benefited greatly from summer tutoring in the past. However, neither of his tutors from the past 2 summers is available for this one." At this, Bobby and Penelope both looked confused. "But Harry, Lord Wilkes can't use a wand during the summer? Can he?" Penelope asked. "There's an exception to the trace," Titus said quietly. "If he pays for a special license, he can use a wand under the supervision of a qualified adult. It's not advertised to Muggle-borns." Bobby started to take offense when Harry spoke up. "For what it's worth, the tutoring license isn't really some conspiracy against Muggle-borns as much as it is a conspiracy against everyone who's not rich. The license is fairly expensive." "Of course it is," Bobby muttered. "But still, why do you need 3 tutors?" "Because this year, we're doing things a bit differently," Artie answered. "Instead of one-on-one tutoring, Harry will be joined by several of his friends, possibly as many as 10 or so, most of whom are of different ages. Consequently, we'll be treating it almost like a day school. Each of you will be responsible for specific subjects for which you will need to prepare lesson plans for both third-year and fourth-year students," Harry said. "And possibly a couple of 6th years," he added. "In addition to tutoring, a few of us are studying ancient runes and arithmancy. We have several enchantment projects we want to explore over the summer. I know all 3 of you took both ancient runes and arithmancy for your newts. But this is not just a part-time summer job," Hestia interjected. "It's also an opportunity for us to evaluate the 3 of you. At the end of the summer, both Lord Wilkes and Lord Black will take their oaths of unity and officially become Lords of the Wizengamot. Mr. Podmore will serve as Seneschal for House Wilkes, and I will perform the same role for House Black. While our law firm can handle the legal and political affairs of these 2 houses, each lord will also need a personal assistant. This person will liaise between the Lord and Seneschal as needed, handle scheduling and organization of meetings and social events, and manage correspondence with ministry officials and other lords and ladies of the Wizengamot. In short, someone capable of representing an ancient and noble house. If you play your cards right, a position like this could be incredibly beneficial for developing contacts and gaining personal recognition, in addition to the standard compensation. The three graduates were shocked by Hestia's description. Titus had a question. You indicated that you will have job openings for 2 assistants, but there are 3 of us. As far as the job that's on the table right now, Sirius replied, there are only 2 spots. However, if you impress us over the summer, I'm sure we'll find room for a 3rd. Also, Mr. Latimer mentioned an interest in pursuing a mastery. To sweeten the deal, at the end of a year's service, if any of you still want a mastery, we'll pay for it and work out either a repayment plan or a period of oath-bound service equal to what we paid. Oh, Harry said. Sirius added, you'll also get free room and board here. I have 17 bedrooms. We might as well get someone to fill them. Artie asked, so, does the job I've described interest any of you? Bobby looked back and forth between Titus and Penelope. When can we start? He said eagerly. June 27, 1994. DMLE headquarters. You understand, of course, how problematic this is, the Death Eater said diplomatically. James Potter nodded respectfully and tried not to think about the whole Death Eater thing, as he felt it would not be a fruitful topic for discussion during this job interview. He still had no idea what Fudge and Bones were thinking in appointing someone like Corban Yaxley to the directorship of the DMLE. Given James's own hiring decisions in the past, he had little room to complain. I'm well aware of the scandals surrounding my departure from the Aura Corps, Director Yaxley, he said cautiously. However, as an animagus, I am effectively required to serve in the ministry in some capacity. And given my past work experience, I would think that something pertaining to law enforcement would make the best use of my abilities. And in principle, I agree, said Director Yaxley airily. But we have to acknowledge the facts, Potter. The most important fact right now is that we have 5 hit wizards in the permanent spell damage ward of St. Mungo's laughing their heads off due to your man Pettigrew, not to mention several more who died or were wounded during his escape with Rookwood. I know I made terrible mistakes where Pettigrew was involved, Jane said, biting down on his temper. A part of him wondered if Yaxley had known Peter as a fellow Death Eater back in the day. And I understand why the hit wizards might have a poor opinion of me as a result of those mistakes. But still. Yaxley raised a hand to silence Potter while he considered the matter. Then, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Actually, Potter, I know exactly where I can put you in a place where your talents can be used effectively, without making you a target for controversy. I believe this area has been understaffed in recent years. Yaxley leaned forward. You were a strong supporter of the Muggle Protection Act, correct? I was, James replied. Perfect. This will work out wonderfully. The Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. 30 minutes later, Arthur Weasley reviewed the ministerial decree with wide eyes. He looked back up at the man who had brought it to him. It was perhaps the last person he expected to take an entry-level job in the least popular ministry department. Now, here he stood in front of Arthur's desk, holding a small box of office supplies and wearing a cheerfully forced expression. Well, this is certainly a surprise, Arthur said somewhat lamely. Are you sure this position is a good fit for you, Lord Potter? Absolutely, James said, even as his forced smile began to feel painful. And please, while I'm here, just forget I'm a lord. Think of me as your humble assistant. A loud harumph came from Perkins, who sat at the other desk crammed into the tiny office. That's junior assistant, right? James swallowed and willed his smile to stay in place. He recalled that Perkins had been sent down to the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office to work as Weasley's assistant after failing out of the hit wizards, reportedly for drinking on the job. Now, Perkins would be his superior. Right, of course, definitely junior assistant, James replied. Cheer up, Perkins, Arthur said as he reviewed the orders again. Potter doesn't come here empty-handed. We've also been approved for larger office space. Oh? Where are they moving us? Perkins asked, somewhat excitedly while his boss continued to read. Arthur cleared his throat. Room 247, right next to the boiler room. Perkins glared at James. Welcome aboard, he said with visible irritation. James smiled even harder, despite the disdain. Meanwhile, as Potter turned his back, Arthur discreetly moved a letter he had received that morning to the side, hiding the Wilkes House seal from his new junior. Later that evening at the Burrow, after a long day spent relocating the Office of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts to an even more cramped and uncomfortable space, Arthur Weasley traveled by flew to find 2 extra guests at the dinner table with Molly, Harry Black and Artemis Podmore. "Ah, Lord Wilkes," he said in surprise. "I apologize for being late. I haven't had a chance to change into something more formal." "Please don't worry on our account, Mr. Weasley," the boy replied amiably. "And call me Harry." "Only if you will call me Arthur," the man said as he sat at the table and addressed his wife. "Where are the kids, Molly?" "Percy is in his room, the twins are out flying, Ginny is at the Lovegoods, and Ron is out." Arthur nodded knowingly. During their first day working together, James had given him the Potter's flu address and mentioned that Ron was welcome anytime. Considering the letter sent by Podmore on Harry's behalf, Arthur decided to contact Molly during his lunch break and ask her to send his youngest son to visit the boy who lived for the rest of the day. Like most of the ministry, Arthur was aware of the oath of enmity between House Black and House Potter, even if it was one-sided. He thought Ron's presence at the Burrow might complicate their discussions. Arthur sat down at the table across from the 2 guests, with Molly at his side. "As I understand from your letter, you wanted to meet with us regarding the satisfaction of a life debt. Does this have something to do with what happened with Ron at the end of his second year?" Harry looked confused for a moment until he realized what Arthur meant. The letter had only mentioned the satisfaction of a life debt. Harry was surprised to realize that Arthur and Molly Weasley were unaware of the debt he was referring to. Indirectly, Harry said, "I'm not claiming a life debt from Ron. Both Jim and Ginny were also down in the Chamber of Secrets, and we all helped one another to save him. I'm referring to the life debt I owe George." Arthur and Molly exchanged confused glances. Harry hesitated. "Can I assume that he didn't tell either of you what he did for me on the morning of all that Chamber of Secrets business?" "I don't recall him mentioning anything that might involve a life debt," Molly said. "Though I remember he was in the infirmary when we got to Hogwarts. I think he said he helped to get you out of the greenhouse before it exploded. But before we got any details, Fawkes brought you all there, and we were distracted by Ron's condition." Harry braced himself, expecting Molly to react strongly. "George wasn't near the greenhouse when it exploded, Mrs. Weasley. He was inside it. With me." "What?" she shrieked. Harry continued, explaining that he had inadvertently triggered an explosive rune trap, which he blamed on Professor Lockhart and his evil book. He shared how George had bravely followed him in and rescued them both with an innovative use of the Protego Orbis charm. Arthur and Molly were stunned. "I had no idea," Arthur said faintly. "To be honest, I'm not surprised," Harry replied. Despite the twins' knack for drawing attention, George can be quite humble about things not related to pranking. "But if it hadn't been for him, I'd have died that day. Now, I'm in a position to repay the debt I owe him and to your entire family. Lord Wilkes, Harry, George didn't save you for money. He did it because it's the right thing to do. I know that, Mr. Weasley. To be honest, I'm not sure I'd feel so strongly about owing him if I thought he'd saved me for selfish reasons." He paused, searching for the right words. "The thing is, you Weasleys are good people. I only spent a few days here during the summer before last, but I can honestly say it was my first real exposure to what a family should be like." Arthur blushed, and Molly's eyes became misty. Harry continued, "I truly feel like I owe my life to George, and by extension, your whole family. If I have to owe a life debt to someone, I'd prefer it to be people I like and would be proud to help." Arthur nodded. "And what do you have in mind?" Harry looked to Artie and nodded. House Wilkes proposes to pay House Weasley's dues to the Wizengamot for the next 5 years, he said. Both elder Weasleys looked faint. That's... Molly stammered. A great deal of money, I think, is what my wife is trying to say, Arthur added. That's very generous, Lord Harry. But I can't accept that. I hope we will someday reactivate our noble seat. But when we do, it will be because our whole house has earned it. I wouldn't feel right accepting such a benefit for something one of my sons did, as proud of him as I may be. Artemis turned back to Harry with a grimace and handed him a sickle. Harry turned to the Weasleys with a smirk. I told him you would be too honorable for something that direct. So how about we start with something less generous and go from there? House Wilkes proposes to pay for the education of your remaining minor children through a mastery if they want one. In addition, House Wilkes proposes to pay for Summer 1 training licenses for George, Fred, Ginny, and Ron and to invite them all to my home for private lessons this summer. That offer seemed more acceptable to the Weasleys, and Artie explained how Harry's day school would work. The kids would travel to the manor via Floo and would be able to use their wands under adult supervision from 9 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, for days a week. They would also... Harry could provide the Weasley children the opportunity to practice flying since the manor had a full-size Quidditch pitch. He also offered to support any other educational options they might want. Bear in mind, this is not in satisfaction of the life debt, Harry added. I owe your family a lot more than this. This is just the least I could do, and I wish you'd let me do more. After a few minutes of questions, Molly and Arthur stepped out to discuss the offer. While they were gone, the twins entered through the back door. Harrikins, exclaimed George. What's our favorite sneaky snake doing here? Harry explained the situation, much to Fred's horror. You're trying to talk our mum and dad into making us study for most of the summer? Fred asked. Artie laughed. More like, we're trying to talk your parents into letting you use your wands for most of the summer. Fred made a face. Okay, that does sweeten the deal, I reckon. After a few minutes, Molly and Arthur returned. On behalf of House Weasley, Arthur said, I graciously accept your offer of instruction for our children. I hope this marks the beginning of friendship between our two houses. Molly added, we do have one small condition, though. She held up her thumb and forefinger a half-inch apart. I think it would be best if I accompanied the children to make sure everything's all right and that they all behave themselves. Molly's eyes cut over to the twins, who gave their most innocent expressions. That would be perfectly acceptable, Artie said. As I'm sure Harry would agree. Definitely, Harry said cheerfully. In truth, it wasn't acceptable at all. If Molly was watching, the twins wouldn't have the freedom to experiment. Harry had quite a few suggestions for future experiments. But he could hardly deny Molly the right to accompany her children to an unfamiliar location. Oh well, he thought to himself as he stepped forward to shake Arthur's hand. I guess I'll need to figure out how to distract her from time to time. Before anyone else could speak, a loud whoosh came from the flue, and Ron's voice called out from the next room. Mum? Mr. Potter's not home from work yet. Is it okay if Jim eats with us? Ron trailed off as he entered the dining area, just in time to see Harry and his dad shaking hands, with Harry's lawyer standing off to the side. Harry turned, and his smile faded when he saw Jim standing next to Ron in the doorway. Are we interrupting something? Jim asked suspiciously. A silence fell across the room, broken by Fred's stage whisper to his twin. Awkward. At Full Privet Drive, Surrey, 10 minutes later, Lily exclaimed, Oh, you're back, in surprise. Is something going on at the Burrow? Yeah, Jim replied distractedly as he brushed the flu powder off his shoulders. They're having a family meeting. So I guess I'll be eating here after all. Lily studied Jim's face. What happened? It's nothing. Jim, Lily interrupted firmly. The boy who lived sighed loudly. Harry was there. He apparently worked out a deal where Ron, Ginny, and the twins will go to Harry's place for summer tutoring 4 days a week. Oh. "Well, that's good for Ron, isn't it?" she asked cautiously. Jim nodded but said nothing. Intellectually, he understood that he was under a magical compulsion to distrust his brother, so he tried to avoid feeling paranoid. However, he also knew that Harry was under a magical compulsion to hate him as well. It wasn't entirely implausible that Harry had paid for the Weasley summer schooling just to spitefully deprive Jim of his best friend's company for most of the summer. "Listen," he finally said, "I'm gonna go lie down until dinner. Any word from Dad? He should be home in an hour. Dinner will be ready at 7. Jim adjusted the collar of his shirt. Jim wiped his forehead. "Is the air conditioner out again?" he asked. Lily nodded. "I'll cast some cooling charms upstairs before we go to bed." He nodded and went upstairs without saying anything else. In his bedroom, Jim wiped his forehead again and opened the small window to let in a breeze. He lay down on his bed and stared up at the ceiling while waiting for his parents to call him down, wondering how life could get worse. Potter Manor, 11 in the evening. Harry Black stood once again before the mirror in his bathroom. He brushed his teeth and rinsed his mouth. Once more, he studied his reflection for a few seconds before leaning in closer to stare deep into his own green eyes. His forehead creased in concentration, and this time, he was rewarded, albeit painfully. With a sharp yelp, Harry staggered back, clutching his hand to his face to cover his left eye, which felt like it had just been stabbed. Slowly, he pulled his hand away and gasped at the sight of his reflection. Harry's green eyes were now blue. "Yes!" Harry exclaimed, giving a fist pump. But then, he leaned in closer to the mirror and frowned. His eyes were indeed blue, but they were not the same shade. The eye on the right was pale, while the one on the left was a very dark blue. Much darker than what was usually seen in human eyes. The left eye was also noticeably larger than the right eye, likely the source of Harry's sudden headache. He grimaced and focused on his mismatched eyes, trying to concentrate on changing them back. He was partially successful. The right eye returned to its former green, but the left eye grew even larger in Harry's skull, and the blue iris expanded so that the sclera turned blue as well. Fuming, he summoned his house elf. "Dobby, would you please go and fetch Regulus? I appear to have broken one of my eyes again." Later in Surrey, a raven soared through the skies above. Surrey was quiet under the night sky. As the raven flew, the troubles of the boy who lived faded away. There was only the vast sky above and the ground below. The raven glided gracefully down to perch on a tree branch. From this vantage point, the bird surveyed the area below with a regal air. Meanwhile, Jim stirred from his sleep and immediately winced in pain as he realized his bed was uncomfortable. He opened his eyes and lifted his head to take in his surroundings. "Oh boy," he muttered nervously. His anxiety was understandable. He had woken up in unfamiliar circumstances. Jim Potter found himself not in his bed but lying on a thick branch halfway up a tree in someone else's backyard. He had no idea whose tree it was or whose backyard, except that it was definitely not his own. To make matters worse, Jim was completely naked. Cautiously, he climbed down from the tree and crept around the house as quietly as possible. To his relief, the sign out front read Privet Drive. Unfortunately, it indicated number 33 instead of number 4, which meant he had quite a jog ahead of him. After rummaging through a bin, he found an empty cardboard box and fashioned it into something slightly less embarrassing than total nudity. He then began his trek back home. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when he finally arrived. It had been a quick run, and surprisingly less embarrassing than he had feared. He only had to duck into nearby bushes 3 times to avoid being seen by passing cars. Once back at number 4, Jim snuck around to the back and looked up at the open window of his bedroom. After discarding his makeshift cardboard loincloth, he took a moment to steady his breathing before sprinting toward the rear wall. He easily scampered up the trellis. Just as Jim thought he was home free, he reached for the sill of his bedroom window and was met with an unexpected challenge. Jim tried to pull himself inside when the window suddenly slammed shut, narrowly missing his fingers. Startled, he fell backward and lost his grip on the windowsill. As he fell, Jim twisted in midair to see the ground approaching. Just before his face could hit the ground, he found himself skimming across the grass instead. With a powerful thrust of his wings, the raven took flight and gracefully arced back toward the house. The bird spread its wings to glide in for a landing, but it was Jim's bare feet that touched down on the grass. He looked down at his hands in amazement, certain they had been wings just a moment before. He glanced back at the window before closing his eyes in deep concentration. Unfortunately, after 10 seconds of effort, Jim could not find the mental switch to intentionally transform into his animagus form. On the bright side, he realized he could change reflexively to avoid injury during a fall. It seemed he could even transform while unconscious for a bit of sleep flying. Grimacing, he shook his head and made another run for the back wall. He scampered up as easily as before and carefully pulled himself onto the window sill. To his relief, the window opened easily, and Jim slipped inside, his little adventure in public nudity finally over. His pajamas lay in a pile on the bed, and he quickly dressed before getting back under the covers. The clock on his nightstand read 5:15. As Jim drifted back off to sleep, he did not hear the whispered word that lingered in the air, though no one was there to say it. Freak. Chapter 2, Marseilles, with an S. June 28, 1994. For Privet Drive. 1:30 in the afternoon. I bet if I begged enough, I could talk Mum and Dad into letting me out of going to summer school, Ron said, disdain dripping from the last 2 words. Jim laughed. Ron still had a week before his summer tutoring, sponsored by Harry Black, began, so he had wheedled permission to come see Jim after finishing his morning chores. Presently, the boy who lived and his best friend were in the backyard of For Privet Drive, working on their carters. Come on, mate, his friend said. Your folks would never turn down the chance for you to get summer 1 training. It'll put you in the top 10 next year for sure, given how much you improved just from spending last summer in Shambhala. To be honest, I'm embarrassed that I never asked Dad to pay for you to have a wand license so we could train together back when. His voice trailed off abruptly. When my family was rich was how that sentence was going to end. Still, Ron replied, I hate that you're going to be stuck here alone all summer. Is there anything to do here in Muggle Town? Jim shrugged. I haven't really gone exploring yet. I think Mum's worried I'll say or do something stupid that breaks the statute of secrecy. How? I'm a pureblood, and I at least know how to walk to the corner store without starting an international incident. Jim laughed. It's not that bad. I went with Mum and Dad to the grocery store the other night. I'd never seen one before. I'd always just assumed that the house elves made it all from nothing. And Saturday, we're going into London to buy some more Muggle clothes. Sounds exciting. Ah, shut up, Jim said in response to Ron's smirk. I'm living the Muggle life now. I have to get my kicks where I can. Ron said dubiously. So has anything interesting happened since you moved in? At that, Jim's face turned pensive. He glanced back up at the house to make sure Lily was not watching. Jim wasn't watching out the back window. Well, I'm pretty sure I turned into a raven last night, he finally said. Ron blinked a few times. Okay. Is that a weird Muggle expression I've never heard before, or are we talking actual raven? The latter, Jim replied, then began to recount his adventure from the previous night. Ron couldn't help but laugh. Wait, you woke up naked in a tree? Shush! Jim hissed. Mum and Dad don't know. Well, if you're changing uncontrollably into an animagus form, don't you think you should tell them? Or at least tell your dad since he actually is an animagus. Jim looked away. It was kind of an impulse when I went all the way with the ritual Remus did for me. All my mum knows is that I was working on a partial transformation to get an animagus's natural occlumency defenses. Dad doesn't even know that much. I'm kind of worried about how they'll take it since I'm not registered. Well, the way I see it, Ron replied, you can either tell them now, or you can start working on an explanation to give them whenever you get arrested for indecent exposure. A week later, at the Manor on July 4th, summer lessons began at the still-to-be-renamed Potter Manor. After a few weeks, Harry found himself quite pleased with how things were going. In addition to himself, Theo, Amy, and the 4 minor Weasley children, the group was joined by Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, Sue Lee, Anthony Goldstein, and Justin Finch Fletchley. On the first morning, Harry had 2 laughs. First, there was the look of aghast horror on Titus Mitchell's face when he realized he'd be teaching the Weasley Terrors. Then there was Regulus's gobsmacked expression when Harry introduced him to Hermione in his new identity as Archie Goodwin, the American half-blood bodyguard. "By any chance, Mr. Goodwin, have you ever read a Muggle author named Rex Stout?" she asked innocently. "Never heard of him," Regulus replied. Archie muttered irritably. Aside from those 2 brief hiccups, the summer lessons went splendidly for Harry, although he noticed that Hermione seemed a bit withdrawn. After some gentle prodding, he got her to reveal what had been distracting her. It turned out that she was traveling every day by flue, specifically through the fireplace in her father's new apartment. Mr. and Mrs. Granger were still working together as dentists, but they had reached the trial separation stage of their slow-motion divorce. Mr. Granger, who seemed to be embracing his squib heritage, had installed a flue connection in his new home. Hermione stayed with him during the week and spent weekends with her mother, which saddened Harry, even though he felt helpless to console her. By the 3rd day, Harry managed to divert Molly Weasley from her watchful gaze on Fred and George by introducing her to Buttercup in his own kitchen. Within a week, he struck a deal with the Weasleys, allowing Molly's magical morsels to use that space and the Potter House elves when they were free from their duties at the manor. Although Harry had initially offered the space for free, Molly insisted on a rental agreement, so he would collect a small percentage of the profits from any food she prepared for her clients while at the manor. As an added bonus, he personally hired her to cater the Jim Potter birthday gala, even though he wouldn't be there to witness it this year. The kitchen wasn't the only part of Potter Manor that Harry had subleased. In a more informal arrangement, one large room was dedicated to the Goldstein group, which was brainstorming ways to perfect and commercialize I Spies. Another room was set aside for Weasley's Wizarding Wheezes, the twins' proposed joke shop. "What are wheezes anyway?" Harry asked. "It's a word that starts with W," Fred replied with a grin. "Georgie boy mistakenly thought it was a Muggle word for jokes," George said with a shrug. "The idea was that our products would be so funny you would wheeze with laughter when you saw them in use. We were going to call it Weasley's Wizarding Wonders, but apparently, there is already a company called Wonderwitch that sells cheap knockoff love potions. They've got a reputation for suing anyone that sells a potion with Wonder in the title. We may change it if we think of something better." Despite all the work his classmates were putting into their summer activities, Harry pushed himself the hardest. He had 8 hours of magical instruction from his hired tutors from Monday through Thursday, bookended by 2 hours of physical conditioning and wushy-do in the morning and 2 hours of dueling practice after dinner. On the weekends, Harry also spent several hours each day working with Regulus to develop his metamorphic powers. By the end of July, he could reliably change his eye color and hold the new look indefinitely. Reshaping his hair, let alone changing its color, was more taxing. While Harry could make his scar disappear, doing so caused headaches and could only be done for 20 minutes before the lightning bolt scar returned. Finally, Harry still met with Professor Snape every Sunday afternoon for training in both occlumency and legilimency. In addition to refining the skills he already had, Snape introduced 3 new concepts. The first was the Advocatus Diaboli, a technique for creating a secondary personality capable of providing mostly impartial advice and opinion. To Harry's surprise, Snape became evasive when Harry asked him about his own Advocatus. Given Snape's background, Harry assumed it was probably based on a Death Eater or someone else he might disapprove of. The second technique was called neural suppression, which was a way of temporarily shutting off pain receptors so that the occlument could continue to function even while injured. Unfortunately, the technique didn't protect the occlument from magical sources of pain, such as the Cruciatus Curse. However, it allowed him to continue functioning despite otherwise debilitating physical damage. Finally, Snape began formal instruction on ward sensing, a concept he had introduced during the summer after Harry's first year. Ward sensing was actually the most commonly used form of legilimency, as all curse breakers, enchanters, and spell designers were expected to be proficient in it. After all, failing to recognize dangerous magic could lead to dire consequences. After 3 weeks of intense study, Harry was ready for a break. On July 23, Harry, Theo, and Neville, chaperoned by Archie Goodwin, made their way to Heathrow Airport, where they joined Justin Finch-Fletchley and his parents. Soon after, they boarded the Learjet owned by Justin's wealthy family for a week-long trip to Marseilles. During their absence, the other students would enjoy a week off from study. Meanwhile, Sirius grumbled about not being able to accompany Harry, but Andromeda Tonks firmly refused him permission to leave the country. And certainly not on some damnable Muggle flying contraption, she snapped. Who knows what effect it might have on you? Or what effect your magic might have on an airplane if it starts acting up while you're a mile up in the air? While en route to the south of France, Justin and his parents were acutely aware that most of their guests had never been on a plane before. Archie Goodwin clearly had some experience with Muggle air travel, but the 3 younger wizards reacted to being in a jet with varying degrees of excitement and terror. Far sooner than any of the wizards could have anticipated, the jet landed at Marseilles Airport, where they were met by Gunther Hagrid and the van he had rented for the occasion. As the van pulled out from the airport parking lot, Harry noticed the sign in front of the facility. I thought there was an S at the end of Marseilles, he asked aloud. There is in the British spelling, Mr. Finch-Fletchley replied. Justin Finch-Fletchley smiled. Of course, adding a silent S to a French place name that French speakers don't use is perhaps the most British thing ever. Justin laughed, but his father had to explain to the other young wizards about the traditional rivalry between Britain and France. Theo and Neville knew nothing about the latter country, while Harry only admired the French for their cuisine. More interesting than the history lesson, at least for Harry, was the easygoing manner in which Mr. Finch-Fletchley delivered it. In his 2 prior interactions with Justin's parents, both had seemed affected by the mysterious curse that caused Muggles to develop an instinctive and intense dislike for him. To his surprise, Harry sensed no animosity from the Muggles today. He wondered what had changed and resolved to speak to Snape about it upon his return to Britain. For the next several days, the group would be staying at the farm, Blaze's name for the country manor house on the grounds of his family's French vineyard just a few miles outside Marseilles. While not as impressive as Potter Manor or Longbottom Manor, the farm still had an excessive number of guest bedrooms. Once everyone was settled in for the week-long stay, the group met downstairs for lunch, followed by an afternoon trip to a private beach on the Riviera. The swimming was excellent, and as Blaze had promised, there was even windsurfing, which Harry took to with considerable skill. That night, after dinner, the adults gathered around a card table for a few hours of bridge. Blaze led his friends to a guest house that had been warded to allow technology to function properly. Just outside was a satellite dish plugged into the largest TV screen Harry had ever seen, and of course, the only one that Neville and Theo had ever seen. Even Justin was impressed and pleased, as he had brought the first movie the boys would be watching all the way from home. Father's collection back in Edinburgh? So that's James Bond? Harry asked. Yes, Justin replied. Well, one of them. I thought this Bond fellow was one of the good guys. Neville exclaimed, sounding scandalized. He's beating up some poor widow on the day of her husband's funeral. No, Neville, Harry said, following the plot better than his wizard-raised friends. The widow is actually the guy who's supposed to be dead. He's a villain who threw a fake funeral to throw his enemies off the trail while disguising himself as his own wife. Oh? Theo asked, sounding doubtful. Is that something Muggles do often? Whoa. Neville interrupted before anyone could answer. Muggles can fly. I mean besides in a plane. That's called a jetpack, Justin explained, as in the background, wailing trumpets and Tom Jones introduced the theme from Thunderball. Muggles do have them. It's not an efficient way to travel, though. Think of it like a backpack that can generate a continual ventus out of the bottom. While the wizard-raised guests were awed and impressed by their first James Bond movie, they were utterly baffled by Blaze's choice for a follow-up, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. What's a moose? Neville asked. A large elk-like creature found in Scandinavia and North America, Justin answered. They sure do seem to have a lot of them in a story about King Arthur, the Gryfinder said. Actually, there are no moose in the movie, Blaze explained. Nor llamas. That's what makes it funny. Neville and Theo looked at one another. I'll take your word for it, Theo said. Sadly, while Justin and Blaze laughed through the whole movie, Theo and Neville never seemed to get the absurdist humor of Monty Python. However, they did come away with the impression that cross-dressing was far more common among Muggles than they had ever imagined. As for Harry, he was initially as baffled as his two brothers, right up until the Black Knight exclaimed, "I've had worse," after losing an arm. Then, something clicked in Harry's mind, and he laughed out loud. By the end of his trip to Marseilles, Harry would watch every Monty Python videotape in Blaise Zabini's collection, some of them twice. On July 28, 1994, at the Hotel Street German in Paris, France, Harry and his friends traveled by portkey to Le Quartier Magique in the heart of Paris. They checked into the luxury wizarding hotel, Eitel Street German. This hotel was not only one of the most famous wizarding accommodations in the world but also the host site for the 328th Paris Open, the first European dueling competition of the season open to novice duelists. Countess Zabini had rented several suites in the hotel for her guests. Early the next morning, Harry and Justin went downstairs to register at a table beneath a large banner that read European Student League. Novice class. Harry estimated that about 50 kids from all over Europe, between the ages of 12 to 16, were competing that morning. From what Harry could tell, nearly all of them, even the younger participants, had been dueling longer than he and Justin. Suddenly, Harry's debut threatened to become a more daunting experience than he had initially realized. The preliminaries were relatively unstructured and had two components. For the first 2 hours, all the novices would go through the compulsories, where each contestant had to demonstrate all the spells from the approved list that they had mastered before a panel of 6 judges. For Harry, that meant demonstrating all the spells. Regulars had been annoyingly thorough on that point. A few younger contestants simply didn't know enough spells to make it through the compulsories and were eliminated, but most who came to this competition were prepared and proficient enough to pass the first round. Next, each remaining novice received a dueling schedule for the rest of the morning. All the matches would take place in the hotel's grand ballroom, a vast space twice the size of the Hogwarts Great Hall. The room contained 8 rectangular dueling areas, allowing for spectators on all sides. Additional seats on raised platforms lined the walls, enabling spectators to watch all the matches simultaneously if they chose. Harry's schedule did not name any opponents. Instead, he received a list of 5 time slots and the numbers of the dueling spaces where each of his best-of-3 duels would occur. He would only learn the identity of his opponent just before each duel began. These preliminary duels were point-based, with 3 judges evaluating the duelists on skill, poise, and depth of spellcasting knowledge. The top 16 novices would then advance to a single elimination tournament starting that evening. While winning a duel would earn significant points, it was not the only factor to consider. After all, they were novices, and luck would play a considerable role in many of the morning's duels. Before heading off for their first round duels, Harry and Justin fist-bumped for luck. Soon after, Harry's nervousness began to fade when he faced his first opponent, a German wizard named Horst, whose last name was too difficult for Harry to pronounce. Horst was a heavy-set 12-year-old who had just completed his second year at Beauxbatons, and his lack of experience was evident. Harry defeated him easily in 2 straight rounds without even needing to dilate. His next 2 opponents fell as well, though not as easily as young Horst. However, in his 4th match, Harry encountered his first real challenge, Albert Yaxley, who had just finished his 4th year at Durmstrang. The younger son of Corban Yaxley was known for being quite active in dueling at school, but this was his first opportunity to compete at this level. Making up for lost time, Albert charged at Harry as soon as the duel began. After a furious 45-second contest, he became the first person to disarm Harry that day, knocking him to the ground in the process. With a smirk, he tossed Harry's wand back and said, "Come on then. Surely Hogwarts can do better than that." He then walked back to his end of the dueling floor, where his older brother, Giles, cheerfully clapped him on the back. Harry narrowed his eyes and gave Archie a meaningful look. His coach sighed and nodded, granting his permission. Harry returned to his opening stance, wordlessly activating the Overto shield at the tip of his wand. 15 seconds later, Albert Yaxley lay flat on his back, bewildered. He fared no better in the tie-breaking round, which also ended in a decisive victory for Harry. Said Theo as Harry stepped down from the dueling platform. He's not a happy camper, is he? Harry glanced back and noticed the younger Yaxley glaring at him furiously. He shrugged and replied, "Phut. A Death Eater's son is mad at me. Like that's never happened before." Later, after defeating his final competitor, Harry and his friends returned to the ballroom for the announcement of the brackets for the novice tournament scheduled for that evening. After lunch, the facilities would be used for compulsory and preliminary rounds for the junior open class duels, with the actual tournament for that class to be held the following Friday night. The adult open class would have their compulsory and preliminary rounds on Friday morning and afternoon, with finals for that group on Saturday morning. The world class tournament was set for Saturday, but there would be no compulsory or preliminary duels. The 32 world class duelists would be there because they had performed well enough in previous tournaments to earn an invitation. As the boys and their friends waited patiently, a portly French wizard stepped forward. Harry approached the lectern and cast the sonorous charm to announce the results. As he tried to focus on the announcer, he noticed Blaise tense up beside him. Curious, Harry glanced at his friend, who was staring off to the side. Following his gaze, Harry quickly understood what had caught Sabini's attention. A group of teenage girls was chattering in French. One girl stood out to him, a striking teenager, about 16, with silvery gold hair. She surveyed the room before saying something to her friends and laughing playfully. "Friend of yours?" Harry asked quietly. Blaise grimaced. "An acquaintance. Fleur Delica from Beauxbatons. She'll be competing in open class later." "Is she any good?" Blaise hesitated. "At dueling?" "She's a very good duelist, but she hasn't made it into world class. I'm surprised she's here today, to be honest." "Oh," Harry replied, sliding his glasses down to look at Blaise meaningfully over the rims. "Anything else you can share about her?" Blaise grimaced again and pretended to cough into his hand as he whispered, "Sunday night." Harry nodded. On Sunday, he would turn 14, and the Countess Sabini was throwing a small party back at the farm in his honor. After the party, she would give Harry a private tarot card reading, his second from the mysterious witch. According to Blaise, if she liked what she saw in his future, the Countess would reveal some secrets she had kept from him since they first met. One of those secrets apparently involved Mademoiselle Fleur Delica. He turned back to watch the girl and made a mental note to catch a few of her preliminary duels. Before he could ask Blaise anything else, he heard Justin's name called out as the 6th seed in the novice. The young Slytherin did not recognize any of the next several names announced. He wondered if he had missed his own name being called earlier or, worse, if he had somehow missed the cut despite having a total of 15 rounds with only one loss. Finally, the announcer called out Albert Yaxley as the 2nd seed and then announced Harry Black as the 1st seed. Although Harry believed he had performed well in the preliminaries, he was still shocked by the announcement. He was caught by surprise when all his friends crowded around him, cheering in celebration. Archie came over and clapped him warmly on the shoulder. "Well done, Harry. I'm very proud of you." "And I am too," said a familiar voice nearby. "I'm doubly glad I got here just in time." Harry spun around in shock. It was Sirius Black, who strode forward and pulled him into a hug. "Sirius? How did you get here?" Archie exclaimed, surprised. With a grin, Sirius pointed over his shoulder at an exhausted but upbeat Bobby Latimer, who was standing just behind him. "My minion brought me," Sirius said with a broad grin. "Can you believe he didn't mention to me until yesterday that he had a car and knew how to drive it?" Harry did a double-take and turned to the young Hufflepuff. "Wait, you drove here from London?" Bobby nodded and yawned. "Yeah. I had to borrow my mum's Ford Fiesta. We left around 4 in the morning London time and took the ferry from Dover to Calais. It took a lot of black coffee, but we got here. Indeed we did, Sirius said merrily. Though before we head back, I may have to install a few spatial expansion charms on it. Bobby's eyes widened comically at the thought of his eccentric employer casting illegal spells on his Muggle mother's car, but Sirius had already turned back to Harry. I might not be able to portkey, apparate or even fly to Paris, but I was never going to stop looking for a way to be here for you. Harry looked speechless, but then a wide grin spread across his face. He thought to himself, is this what it's like having a dad? Just then, Blaze's mother stepped forward. I do not believe we have been introduced, Lord Black, she said in a cultured Italian accent. I am Serena Zabini. Sirius turned to her, his face flushing slightly. Sirius Black, he replied somewhat huskily, bowing his head before taking her hand and gallantly kissing her knuckles. Enchant. Far be it from me to interrupt this heartwarming reunion, Sirius, Archie said, but the hall is clearing out now for the open class prelims. Harry and Justin have a few hours before their actual tournament competition starts. Perhaps they can freshen up now, and then we could continue over lunch. I'm sure the kids are all dying to hear what it was like spending hours on the A1 in a borrowed Super Mini, but you can regale them while we eat. He turned to the Countess. Countess Zabini, would you be so kind as to escort the youngsters upstairs? But of course. Until later, Lord Black. I can scarcely wait, Countess Zabini. Sirius turned to his driver. Latimer, follow along with the kids. I'm sure they can find you a couch to crash on for a few hours. The rest of the group followed the Countess out of the grand ballroom, with Archie and Sirius bringing up the rear. They lingered just enough to be out of earshot, and Archie leaned in close to his brother. Before you get too carried away with your irresistible tendency toward rakishness, Lord Black, are you aware that the charming Countess Zabini has buried 7 husbands? Sirius's eyes bulged in surprise. I was not, and I thank you for the gossip. Although I suppose there could be worse ways to go. Sirius snorted. Just make sure you write a will before the first date, I suppose. Now, why did you really decide to drive to Paris? I came to see my godson show off on the dueling court, of course. The Metamorphmagus raised an eyebrow at his older brother until Sirius continued. And I got some news yesterday. It's probably nothing to do with us, but it made me twitchy, so I started ranting about whether anyone else had a suggestion for getting here non-magically. Young Latimer suggested that he could drive me. Sirius laughed. I think he's worried that I'll pick Mitchell over him, so he wanted to prove that a Muggleborn could be useful to an old pureblood like me. Archie's brow furrowed. Hang on. Don't you know how to drive a car? I seem to recall Mother screaming about it at one point. Nah, just a motorbike. And for that, you just need to know how to turn it on and off. Otherwise, you just pretend it's a broom. He looked thoughtful, wondering whatever happened to his old motorbike and sidecar. So, what was the shocking news? Sirius reached into his jacket and pulled out the previous morning's Daily Prophet, handing it to Archie. It was already open to the society page. Well, the disguised Regulus Black murmured. I can see why this caught your eye. At the top of the page was a moving photo of their cousin Narcissa standing arm in arm with a slightly stunned-looking Tiberius Knott. The blushing bride looked radiant in her wedding gown. The caption beneath the photo revealed that the new Lord and Lady Knott would be honeymooning right here in Paris. Over lunch at Summer Isles, Paris, Sirius broke the news about the sudden remarriage of Theo's ex-father. Maybe it's for the best that Tiberius and Narcissa got married. Another, Blaze quipped. That way, only 2 people are stuck in a horrible marriage instead of 4. I should probably owl Draco, Justin said. When we spoke last week, he mentioned nothing about this. I reckon it was a surprise to him too. How is Draco? Harry asked. I haven't seen him in almost a year. He seems to be enjoying Durmstrang. Better than his last year at Hogwarts, anyway. No giant petrifying snakes or anything like that. he spent the first half of the summer at Quidditch training camps, one in Austria and then another in Spain. He says he'll be at the Quidditch World Cup, though. Harry nodded and then glanced at Theo, who was sitting on his left. How are you dealing with the news? Theo shrugged. I'm worried about how this will affect Alex. Beyond that, I'm just rooting for injuries. Later, after lunch, Harry and Justin returned to the ballroom to watch some of the open-class preliminary duels, accompanied by Archie, Sirius, and the Finch-Fletchleys as their chaperones. The other boys left the hotel for a tour of the Quartier Magique provided by the Countess, while Bobby Latimer contentedly napped in the group's hotel suite. Harry made it a point to catch one of Fleur Delacour's duels, and she took her opponent down with methodical efficiency. He had no way of knowing for sure, but he suspected the older girl could dilate her perceptions. If so, she would be the only other person Harry had encountered with that skill, besides Snape and Dumbledore. Even Rufus Scrimgeour had never learned to dilate, despite his considerable skill at occlumency. In retrospect, it was a tragedy, as that skill might have saved his life in his battle against Rookwood and Pettigrew. But even as Harry continued to study Delacour's precise and economical style, he stiffened as a soft hiss from the tattoo on his upper back intruded into his thoughts. Master, hissed Mark. One who? The dark mark draws near. Behind you. Harry turned casually in that direction, contemplating what he would do if Tiberius Knott or Narcissa Black Knott were sneaking up behind him. However, it was not them. After his earlier encounter with Albert Yaxley, Harry was not surprised to see that the Death Eater detected by Mark was Corban Yaxley, the Lord of House Yaxley and the newly appointed director of the DMLE. Lord Wilkes, the Death Eater said cheerfully. I don't think we've been formally introduced. I am Corban Lord Yaxley. It is an honor to meet you, sir, Harry replied, lying smoothly. And my congratulations on your recent promotion. Thank you. And you, of course, have my congratulations on your own ascension to the Wizengamot. Has there ever been a lord as young as yourself? Not since the 17th century, or so I've been told. Harry shifted his attention to the two young men standing beside the Death Eater. The younger one, Albert Yaxley, had lost to Harry earlier that morning, shaking Harry's hand perfunctorily after the match ended 2-1. They had not spoken since. And congratulations on your son's performance today. I look forward to our rematch this evening, Harry said. As do I, Albert replied coolly. But right now, we're on our way to watch my brother compete. Harry's attention moved to the other boy. Giles Yaxley was at Durmstrang's 7th year and would be competing in the open class, having won the novice championship 2 years earlier. Feel free to join us, Lord Wilkes, the elder Yaxley added. We're on foreign soil for this competition. We Brits have to stick together, what? Naturally. And speaking of fellow Brits, I'm sure I don't need to introduce Justin Finch-Fletchley, the heir presumptive of House Prince. Of course not, Yaxley said, plastering a fake smile on his face. You? Certainly made an impression on the Wizengamot, heir prince, Lord Yaxley said. A good one, I hope, Justin replied mildly. Although not a legilimate, Justin was observant enough to notice the flicker of mild distaste on Lord Yaxley's face at the mention of the notorious mudblood who had dared to claim a seat in the Wizengamot, even if only through a regency. Additionally, Justin's magical guardian was Severus Snape, who had taken the time to identify for Justin everyone currently serving in the Wizengamot that had escaped prosecution as a Death Eater with a flimsy Imperious defense, including the man standing before him. In addition to being cursed by the fictitious Marcellus Frump, Yaxley had also been placed under the Imperious curse by Bereth Selwyn, the former Selwyn heir who confessed to using unforgivables to coerce several members of the extended Selwyn family into the Death Eaters. After his confession and conviction, Bereth took his own life in a ministry holding cell before he could be transferred to Azkaban. After a few moments of small talk, the Yaxleys left for Giles's next match. Justin leaned in toward Harry. So just between us, Yaxley's a former, you know. Yep, Harry confirmed. The Hufflepuff nodded. I'm pretty sure that was the first time since I claimed my heirship that I noticed a pureblood looking down on me like I was something to be scraped off their shoe. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Harry chuckled, and then he, Justin, and Archie followed behind the Yaxleys. After all, Harry thought, it could never hurt to study someone's fighting style, especially someone who might try to kill you someday. That night, the novice class tournament began promptly at 7, with the top half of the seeded duelists quickly establishing their dominance in each best-of-5 round. The only upset in the initial bracket was when the 10th seed, a fierce girl from Beauxbatons named Amaya Bidart, surprised everyone. Villalobos, who pointedly corrected the announcer that she was not Spanish but Basque, defeated the 7th seed from Durmstrang in 3 straight rounds. Harry noticed that the delicate girl was among the crowd of Beauxbatons students cheering for her. While Harry respected Villalobos' aggressiveness, he still managed to defeat her almost as easily as he had the 16th seed he faced first, a spoiled rich American boy whose name Harry had already forgotten. Justin also performed exceptionally well, winning his first round easily and then upsetting the 3rd-seeded competitor, a lad from Beauxbatons named Rolf Scamander. Harry was unsure if Rolf was related to the famous Newt Scamander, but he recognized several of the boy's hexes and curses from the aura training manuals Mad-Eye Moody had given him. Despite being well-trained, Rolf couldn't break through Justin's masterful Averto shield. Unfortunately, Harry's hopes for an all-Hogwarts final were dashed when Justin faced Albert Yaxley in the semi-final. The Durmstrang student was not only a ruthless duelist, but also a clever one. Recognizing Justin's powerful defensive skill, Yaxley focused on spells meant to bypass Averto, such as Avis Apuno and Incendio. The latter was at the extreme edge of what was permissible for novices. Averto could not defend against a flock of birds any better than it could against a gout of flame, and Justin lost 2-1. 40 minutes later, it was time for the final match of the evening, the championship bout between Harry and Albert Yaxley. Both competitors had studied their opponents well, but Harry had the advantage of having seen how the Durmstrang student had defeated Justin. The first round went to Harry when Yaxley sent a flock of birds to attack him. Harry calmly activated his Vestamentorum shield and strode boldly through the flock, catching his shocked opponent with a flurry of stunners. However, the second round went to Yaxley, who set off a series of brilliant fireworks to obscure Harry's view. When his vision cleared, Harry was shocked to see that his opponent had disappeared. Instantly, Harry realized that Yaxley had disillusioned himself. Reflexively, he cast the supersensory charm to try to locate him. However, that was exactly what Yaxley had anticipated. He immediately set off a second round of fireworks to temporarily deafen Harry before finishing him with a knockback jinx. In the third round, Yaxley grew cocky and attempted the same trick again. This time, when he set off his fireworks, he was shocked to see Harry also disillusion himself. The audience was treated to the sight of 2 invisible duelists, each standing silently while waiting for the other to make the first attack, which would reveal them. After nearly 30 seconds, Harry carefully took a step to the left and whispered the incantation for the supersensory charm again, as softly as he could, ensuring Yaxley heard him. Yaxley set off another round of fireworks meant to deafen Harry, but since he hadn't actually cast the supersensory charm this time, the loud pops did not affect him. Instead, Harry cast a flurry of stunners straight into the mass of fireworks, tagging Yaxley with one of them. The fourth round lasted 6 minutes, quite long for a novice-level duel. Yaxley mainly used fire-based hexes that Harry could not easily parry, forcing the young Slytherin to spend more time dodging than in any of his previous duels. Then, Yaxley saw an opening and fired off an Aguamenti followed by a Glacius in quick succession. Harry slipped on the conjured ice and fell, giving Yaxley the chance to hit him with a disarming jinx before he could scramble back to his feet. Frustrated, Harry called a timeout while the referee vanished the ice that still coated the dueling floor. Harry stepped off the platform to consult his coach. "Suggestions?" he asked tersely. "None," Archie replied flatly. "You're doing everything right, Harry. You're tied with this kid who's older and has been dueling longer than you." Archie leaned in and whispered, and he was raised by a Death Eater who had been an Auror before joining the Dark Lord. "I didn't come here to lose," Harry snapped. "I'm not telling you to accept it. I'm just saying that I don't see how you can get past him with the skills I've taught you. Other than Averto, he's learned all the same lessons. I'm incredibly proud of your performance today, Harry. But all I'll ever ask is that you do your best. Harry made a face. That was completely unhelpful. I wish Moody were here. Archie chuckled as Harry turned and climbed back onto the dueling platform for the final winner-take-all round. He paused to look out into the crowd, where all his friends, along with Sirius, were still cheering for him. To his surprise, the delicate girl was in the stands, sitting directly behind Blaise and the Countess. She was studying him with great intensity. Harry turned back to his opponent, took a deep cleansing breath, and assumed his dueling stance. At the referee's signal, the final round began. This time, Harry decided to go for broke. He immediately fired off an Avis, followed instantly by a second Avis and then a third. Yaxley quickly cast Vestimentrum on himself, taking no damage from the attacking birds. However, he was surprised when so many birds flocked around him that he couldn't see Harry at all. With a snarl, he fired off an overpowered finite that dispelled all the birds within range around him. He was startled when his vision cleared to reveal two Harry Blacks at the opposite end of the platform. The doppelganger defense was a legal charm for dueling, but it was seldom used because usually the doppelganger could at most perform. Simple actions were straightforward unless the caster stood still and focused on more complicated activities. Therefore, it was unexpected to see both Black and his duplicate, the latter controlled by a secondary thought stream Harry had opened, casting spells in perfect unison. Yaxley struggled to determine which one was real. As the two Harry sent simultaneous stunners at him, spaced just far enough apart for Yaxley to sidestep only one, he hesitated for a millisecond. Then he jumped, casting a Ventus directly beneath himself. The blast of air propelled him straight up, allowing the twin stunners to pass beneath him, missing by inches. To Harry's frustration, Yaxley fired off a stunner aimed at the person on the left, which turned out to be the duplicate. Harry's doppelganger vanished just as the real Harry desperately unleashed a volley of spells. As Yaxley fell back to the floor, he landed in a crouch and rolled quickly to avoid the attacks. He then rose to one knee and targeted Harry with a leglocker curse aimed low and beneath Harry's defenses. Harry tried to dodge, but the curse barely clipped his shin. The impact caused his legs to slam together, paralyzing him, and his momentum forced him to lean precariously before falling forward. Yaxley exhaled heavily and smirked. The leglocker required a specialized countercurse, and even if Black knew it, casting the countercurse took roughly 3 seconds. One of the victory conditions for a competitive duel was knocking your opponent to the ground in such a way that he could not get back on his feet within 5 seconds. Not that Black would even have 5 seconds. If he wasted time with the countercurse, he would be defenseless against Yaxley's finishing spell. Additionally, the rules forbade the use of spells while lying prone, and once Harry's chest and stomach were touching the ground, he would be at a severe disadvantage. The ground, Harry knew he couldn't legally cast a spell without risking disqualification. The duel had been close, but it was almost over. As he fell, Harry's mind raced. Thump thump. Even with his maximum focus, the situation felt hopeless. In about 1 second, he would hit the ground, and Yaxley would finish him off before he could get back up. Desperately, Harry recalled the dueling strategies he'd learned from his various teachers. Nothing Regulus had taught him would help, nor anything from Moody or even Remus Lupin, despite not having spent much time learning from the Wushido master. Just as he was about to hit the ground, he remembered a fragment of a conversation with another teacher, Theo No Name. Weeks earlier, Harry had asked, "So explain to me what the point of this is." He was panting, trying to wipe sweat from his eyes. He was nearly horizontal, supported by his left hand, while Theo had decided to incorporate one-handed push-ups into their routine. Nearby, Theo effortlessly pushed himself up from the ground with one hand, the other behind his back. While still in the air, he switched hands to catch himself before falling. He made it look annoyingly easy. "It's called the tide flows and recedes technique," Theo explained, prompting Harry to roll his eyes. While he respected the cultural significance of Wushido, he found the poetic names for the techniques to be grating. Muggles use push-ups and one-handed push-ups to develop upper body strength, Theo continued. But with magic, we can do more. Just like an incoming tide washes up against the shoreline and then recedes, we can use our internal magic to control and redirect our momentum, taking the force that drives us in one direction and using it to push ourselves in another. As he fell toward the ground, Harry caught himself with his left hand and pushed up with even greater force, positioning his body at a 45-degree angle to the ground. At his highest point, he clapped 3 times before falling again. He caught himself with his right hand and repeated the process. "And that's good for," Harry grunted. "Besides showing off, I mean." He was still struggling to achieve a basic one-handed push-up, and as he slowly lowered himself, his arms shook from the effort. Once you're good at it, it will help with dodging. If you're moving in one direction, you can use the technique to instantly change your direction with no loss of momentum. Can you do that? Harry's face was now just 6 inches off the ground, and his left arm trembled uncontrollably. "Huh? I wish." Remus said it'll probably take a year or so of practice before I can use tide flows and recedes in a fight or something like that. Harry didn't respond. Instead, with a loud grunt, he pushed himself up as hard as he could with his left hand and tried to switch hands before coming back down. He failed. "Gah!" he exclaimed as he face-planted painfully. With a deep sigh, he sat up. "Okay, Theo. I admit this probably has some long-term benefit. And Merlin knows I need to be in better shape. But honestly, I'll pay you 100 galleons if I ever find myself in a situation where being able to do a one-handed push-up is of any benefit." Truthfully, Harry had not yet mastered the art of Muggle-style one-handed push-ups, let alone doing them with the magically augmented strength that Theo was just beginning to develop. However, he had finally managed to support his body with one hand, which was all he needed at that moment. Theo ended the dilation and opened a second thought stream. One of his mind seized control of his left arm, causing it to move. Harry swung around, catching himself with his left hand just before hitting the ground. His other mind took control of his wand arm and began the movements for a disarming jinx while that arm aimed at his opponent. As Harry's left arm straightened to support his body, far enough from the ground for spell casting, his right arm pointed his wand straight at the startled Albert Yaxley, who had assumed the match was already won. Expelliarmus! Yaxley tried to dodge, but it was too late. The spell hit him with enough force to knock him to the ground, sending his wand flying. 3 points to 2. "Round and match to black," yelled the referee as the crowd erupted in cheers over Harry's extraordinary victory. Harry himself was amazed to have pulled off the win, and for a moment, he didn't notice the sudden ache in his left arm. Then, he snapped back to reality and pointed his wand at his legs to cast the counter-curse before rising to his feet. He made his way to the center of the court and waited for Albert Yaxley to join him. To Harry's surprise, Yaxley seemed more amazed than angry about his unexpected loss. "What the hell was that last move?" Yaxley asked as he shook Harry's hand. Harry shrugged casually. "Oh, just something I came up with on the spur of the moment," he replied with a smile. Yaxley looked at him strangely but said nothing. As the referee joined them and held Harry's arm up, he scanned the crowd for his friends. Most were cheering madly, but he noticed Theo standing with his arms crossed, wearing a smug expression. Yeah, Harry thought, winning is nice, but the downside is that Theo will never let me hear the end of this. Plus, I owe him 100 galleons. Chapter 3, Speaking of Harry Black. July 9, 1994. For Privet Drive. 8 in the morning. Lily frowned menacingly at the misshapen eggs in the skillet in front of her. Her breakfast of choice was Eggs Benedict with a side of bacon, but she no longer had the benefit of a house elf. Even before her marriage, cooking had never been her strong suit. Her own mother, the late Rose Evans, had been a rather good cook, but neither Lily nor Petunia had ever been interested in learning the skill. Hence, the skillet full of rubbery scrambled eggs and burnt bacon. With a sigh, she transferred the food to 3 plates, which she levitated over to the table with a flick of her wand. James was already at the table, reading that morning's Daily Prophet. He had offered to help with the cooking, but Lily wanted to get the hang of it herself before teaching the pureblood, who would be cooking for himself once school resumed, how to use the stove. He had mastered the electric toaster already, which he had pronounced the most wonderful thing in the world. However, Lily figured he would need to prepare more than toast by the end of August. In response to her call, Jim came down the stairs in Gryffindor-themed pajama bottoms and a black t-shirt. She had taken him clothes shopping a few weeks earlier, and Lily had been surprised that her normally outgoing son had taken to wearing lots of black. He also looked like he was still half asleep, but none of the Potters had slept well in recent nights. With a loud yawn, the boy sat down at the small table and poured himself a glass of orange juice. He preferred pumpkin juice, but that simply wasn't available in the Muggle world. When he had first asked a Muggle shop girl, she had laughed at the idea that it was even possible to juice a pumpkin. To be honest, Jin didn't know how pumpkin juice was made either. As he took a sip of orange juice, he opened the sports section of the Daily Prophet and immediately almost choked. "What's the matter?" James asked with concern. Jim coughed for a few seconds to clear his throat. "Have either of you read this?" he exclaimed. "I picked it up just before you came down," James replied. "I read the news before I started breakfast," Lily added. "It seems Elias Huckstein has just been elected Governor General of the American Wizarding Confederation. He seems rather disagreeable, but he can't be any worse than the people running our government." "I don't mean that," Jin snapped. "I'm talking about the sports section." He slapped the paper down on the table and turned it so his parents could see the headline, "Novice Duelist Harry Black Dominates Paris Tournament." Below the headline, there was a moving picture of Harry's incredible come-from-behind victory over Albert Yaxley. "Harry beat Yaxley's kid," James said with an odd sort of pride. "Good for him." Jim was less pleased. "Yeah, he beat Yaxley and won the tournament, along with a 100-galleon prize. And he used a whooshy-do move to do it." "Really?" Lily asked. "How can you tell?" "Phut! Look at the picture. He's been practicing the tide flows and recedes technique. I've been doing that for a year already." "Jim, calm down," James said. "Why are you so upset? Aside from the fact that whooshy-do is my thing and Harry's using it to win tournaments, there's also the 100-galleon purse. I'm sure I could have beaten him if I'd been there, and we need 100 galleons a lot more than he does." "Now, Jim," Lily said, "you have enough to work on this summer without gallivanting off to France for something as silly as a dueling tournament. And you shouldn't be the one to worry about money. We'll be fine. We just need to tighten our belts a bit." The boy fumed silently for a moment while his parents exchanged concerned glances. Neither of them knew whether his response was genuine jealousy over his former brother's success, or the remnants of the imperious curse that James had cast on him months earlier. They had talked about trying to remove it, but Lily had never used the curse before, and James was too inexperienced to risk accidentally damaging his son's mind further. Asking someone else to fix James's use of an unforgivable was not an option. After a few minutes of heavy silence, Jim finally spoke. "Can I borrow Godric for a week or so, Dad? I'd like to send a letter." James raised an eyebrow. "A letter? That will take a week? How far are you sending our poor owl?" Basically halfway around the world. I just wanted to ask Remus Lupin when he's coming back to Britain." James nodded and gave his son permission to send Godric on a journey that might take a week or more, even for a post owl. Jim nodded and returned to his rubbery eggs. He did not mention that he had another reason for wanting to reach out to his mentor, a Raven-themed reason. Meanwhile, at Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall said cheerfully to her colleague as she sat down for breakfast, "I see that congratulations are in order, Severus." He looked at her quizzically. "Really? And what for, dare I ask?" "I believe Minerva is referring to the remarkable performance of one of your Slytherins, my boy," said Dumbledore, who sat between them. He passed over the Daily Prophet sports section with its headline about Harry Black's extraordinary performance. Snape scanned the article with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was justifiably proud of the success of a boy he had considered a protégé. But on the other hand, he worried that the victory came at the expense of Corban Yaxley's son. He did not know the elder Yaxley, even though they had both been Death Eaters in the past. In fact, he had not known that Yaxley, who was several years ahead of him during their school days, was a Death Eater until he was exposed after the Dark Lord's fall. But Jin knew that House Yaxley was a cadet house to House Selwyn. He was concerned that Harry was making formidable enemies at such a young age. Privately, he wished the boy would consider keeping a lower profile, much like Snape had endeavored to do. Then, as if reading Snape's mind, Dumbledore spoke again. "Oh, and on an unrelated note, I have something for you." With that, he produced a faded envelope and handed it over. Snape recognized the handwriting immediately. "The letter I mentioned many months ago that Damocles Belby left for you," Dumbledore said quietly. "I've reminded you twice of its existence, but you never came by my office to pick it up. So I thought I'd finally deliver it in person." Snape nodded as he took the missive, his own thoughts about keeping a low profile echoing in his mind. When he left Belby's tutelage as one of the youngest potions masters in centuries, Snape had been on the cusp of international fame, at least within the Potioneers community. Had he stayed on the continent and made use of the connections that Belby's reputation offered, he could have carved out his own path to success, likely becoming quite wealthy. Instead, he had been seduced by the prospect of obtaining the Prince Lordship and supporting Voldemort, dooming himself with his own greed and hubris. At that moment, Flitwick spoke up from further down the table, sharing additional insights about Harry's proficiency as a duelist. Snape quietly put the letter away in his pocket for later. Albus noticed but chose not to bring the issue up again. Meanwhile, at the Burrow, when Harry announced that he, Neville, Theo, and Justin would be heading to France for a boys-only holiday, the girls who had been taking summer lessons with his study group felt it was only fair to have a girls' sleepover of their own. Molly Weasley was delighted to hear the girls discussing their plans and volunteered to Burrow. There would be no responsible adults at Potter Manor. Sirius, who had overheard the comment, started to object but then sheepishly admitted that she was probably right. On June 27th, the girls in question, Hermione, Amy, and Sue Lee, flew to the Burrow, where they were joined by Ginny and Luna Lovegood, who lived nearby. Space at the Burrow was limited, but Arthur had already borrowed a tent from his assistant, Perkins. He had erected the tent in the backyard the night before. Enchanted with an undetectable expansion charm, the tent had several rooms and was spacious enough for 5 witches. Sue had agreed to provide the music using a battery-powered CD player, complete with a mixtape from her large collection of Muggle artists. Remarkably, the player worked perfectly fine as long as it was outdoors and far enough from both the Weasley house and the magical tent. To Hermione's delight, Sue's father had modified a pair of communication mirrors so that one would absorb all the sound produced by the player and then transmit it to the other mirror inside the tent, creating a good approximation of Dolby sound. Hermione peppered the Ravenclaw with questions about the spell work involved. As for the playlist, while Sue had a passionate love for industrial and goth punk music, she insisted that The Cure's Disintegration was the greatest work in the history of Muggle music. She decided to go with a girl power theme for the girls-only sleepover. She had burned a CD full of contemporary female Muggle singers like Madonna, Whitney Houston, Tori Amos, Lauryn Hill, and Cher. The pureblood girls were alternately enthralled and scandalized by the lyrics, but they all loved the singing. Privately, Ginny was simply glad that her mother couldn't hear the music inside the tent, or she was sure the words Scarlet Woman would be used. Then again, she might use the same phrase anyway if she could hear how Ginny and the other girls discussed the classmates they found fanciable. Took the opportunity to get to know the Ravenclaw a bit better. Sue Lee was a half-blood and mixed race, with Chinese and British heritage. Her father was Gordon Lee, though Sue believed he had changed his name from something traditionally Chinese when his family moved to Great Britain. Sue's grandmother was a pureblood Chinese witch, while her grandfather was a squib who had still received a magical education at Shambhala. He had told Sue stories about the famous wizarding city when she was a child, but she had never been there herself. Sue's mother was Erica Macmillan, a cousin from the less affluent side of the noble house of Macmillan, which Sue's family proudly distanced themselves from. This was why the ultimate sanction never affected her. Gordon and Erica had both been sorted into Ravenclaw and married soon after graduation. The next morning, the girls gathered around the magically expanded kitchen table for breakfast. They were joined by Arthur, Ron, and the twins, both of whom had been threatened by Ginny with horrific revenge if they disrupted the sleepover. While Arthur and Molly chatted amiably with the young witches, Arthur peppered Hermione and Sully with questions about Muggle life, much to Ginny's embarrassment. The three boys, however, were focused on the Daily Prophet. "Bloody hell!" Fred exclaimed. "What is it, son?" Arthur asked, even as Molly lectured Fred about his language. Fred held up the front page of the sports section to show the headline and the animated picture of Harry's finishing move. "Our ickle snaky friend just won his first dueling contest," Fred added. "And in impressive fashion, it seems." Ron leaned over to take a closer look at the moving picture. "Hey," he said approvingly. "Tight flows and recedes technique. Form needs work, though." Then he returned to his eggs and sausage without further interest. The girls, on the other hand, were very intrigued, and all five of them crowded around to read the article. Discomfited, Fred handed the paper to Hermione and then struggled to navigate through the group of witches to find another chair beside his twin. While the girls giggled with excitement, he leaned closer to George. "Does Harry Black have a harem now or something?" he whispered. George shrugged. "I don't know, brother mine. If he does, are you offended or just jealous?" They briefly discussed Le Courtier Magique and the history of magical France. Le Courtier Magique was one of the largest magical communities in the wizarding world, hidden within a Muggle city. Although it was not as large or populated as Shambhala, it was 5 times the size of Diagon Alley and its nearby magical alleys. Between the Magic Quarter and various magically concealed side streets scattered throughout the city, Paris was home to about 9,000 wizards, nearly a third of France's wizarding population, as well as an equal number of magically aware squibs. This close relationship with the Muggle world stemmed from French magicals historically being more open than most magical nations, despite their respect for the statute of secrecy. Sometimes, this openness had negative consequences. Jellic Grindald, for instance, despised magical France, deeming it a nation of blood traitors, and attempted to destroy Paris on 2 separate occasions because of it. Much of France's relaxed attitude toward Muggles could be traced back to the French Revolution. The statute of secrecy was still relatively new, and French Muggleborns and half-bloods who maintained ties with their Muggle families often became swept up in revolutionary fervor. Conversely, the more reactionary pureblood wizards who supported the Ancien regime and held on to bigotry against those of impure blood fled the country rather than risk the guillotine. For example, nearly the entire House of Lestrange left for Britain, and their absence was hardly felt in France. In time, the Muggle Revolution faltered, leading to the Reign of Terror, the rise of Napoleon, and eventually leading to the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. However, by that time, the ideas of liberty, equality, and brotherhood had taken root among French magicals, influenced by the lessons of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights. In 1804, the newly established Assembly Magique ratified the French Declaration of Wizarding Rights. Decades later, the International Confederation of Wizards would adopt many of its principles into its own charter, though not all. One principle that the ICW did not adopt was that magic belonged to all magical people. As a result, it became illegal in France for any individual wizard or family to claim exclusive ownership of any ley line convergencies. These ley lines were declared the property of the Assembly to benefit all French wizards and witches. Consequently, many ancient wizarding manses, some standing for over 1,000 years, were demolished, and the ley lines that powered them were altered through geomancy according to the Assembly's regulations. Others remained intact but were reproposed. For example, Beauxbatons was originally the lavish ancestral home of the wizarding branch of the House of Montmorency. By 1810, however, the infamous Montmorencys were either dead or in exile, and l'Académie Magique was moved from its previous location in the Pyrenees to the former Montmorency estate. The most impressive accomplishment of the Assembly Magique was the diversion of no fewer than 6 ley lines so they intersected at La Rue Fantastique, which was then merely a hidden magical side street, similar to Diagon Alley. Harnessed by powerful arithmancy and complex runic arrays, the raw magic of the ley lines transformed the side street into a town concealed within a city. Le Courtier Magique spanned nearly 10 square miles while occupying less than 1,000 square feet on a Muggle map. While it was entirely possible for a wizard or witch to live their entire lives there, inside the confines of the Magic Quarter, most inhabitants were more cosmopolitan than one might expect. Parisian magicals took pride in the fact that the Quarter was just one neighborhood within the City of Lights, a major cultural center of the Muggle world. While the Quarter boasted fabulous hotels, museums, and restaurants, many Parisian magicals were happy to enjoy the amenities and entertainment offered in Muggle France. This is why a small kiosk across the street from Eitel Saint-Germain sold tickets to Euro Disneyland Paris, among other things. At 10 in the morning local time, Malcolm Finch-Fletchley finished his purchases at the Euro Disney kiosk and was surprised to see Harry Black sitting alone at a nearby outdoor cafe. In front of Harry sat a butterbeer and a croque-monsieur, neither of which had been touched. Harry looked in Malcolm's direction, clearly hoping he would join him. Intrigued, Malcolm decided to do so. "Mr. Black," he said as he took his seat, "might I ask what has you out here all alone?" "The others are inside watching me open class prelims," Harry replied hesitantly. "I was hoping to talk to you alone, Sir Malcolm, about some financial questions and other things." Malcolm ordered a cup of coffee and a croissant before answering. "Well, I'm not meeting Justin and Barbara for a while yet. Until then, I'd be happy to answer your questions about finance and other things, I suppose." The Slytherin finally took a sip of butterbeer while composing his thoughts. "To begin with, I know from Lord Malfoy that he has, isn't diversified the right word?" Malcolm nodded. "Right. He's diversified his assets so that he has substantial holdings in the Muggle world. And I know from Justin that your family plans to use house prints as a way to invest your Muggle wealth within the wizarding world. I was wondering if you could, I don't know, explain to me how all that works. I've suddenly become a very wealthy wizard, but as far as I've been told, there's not much to do with that wealth except stick it in Gringotts Bank and let it collect dust. Good for you. I commend you for your interest in spreading your wealth beyond the magical community. Frankly, wizarding Britain is shockingly backwards in monetary matters, often in ways that defy my comprehension." "How so?" The Muggle considered the question as the waiter returned. "Okay, let's start with Gringotts Bank. First of all, it's not a bank in the traditional sense. It offers very few of the services a Muggle bank would provide, but it also has a wide variety of services that a Muggle bank would not offer and, in many countries, legally could not offer. You can store currency and other things there for a small fee, which is sort of like a safe deposit box, but really more of a glorified storage unit. Money you deposit with Gringotts does not draw interest. Gringotts does not offer traditional mortgages or any other form of secured loan. They do provide very short-term unsecured loans at usurious interest rates, with legally sanctioned violence as the penalty for default. Because of the Goblin treaties, they are effectively government-sanctioned loan sharks." Malcolm paused to take a sip of coffee. "Likewise, there are no Muggle banks that have the authority to enforce contracts on behalf of one party or another when they're not even a signatory. Muggle banks do not maintain staffs of cursebreakers who are sent around the world to locate and loot tombs, claiming any relics inside on behalf of the bank. Most importantly, Muggle banks do not verify one's lineage. They aren't responsible for resolving inheritance disputes, they don't execute wills as a matter of course, and they certainly don't certify in a legally binding manner that individuals are entitled, regardless of age, to claim seats on the nation's ruling legislative body. In the Muggle world, inheritance matters are handled through the courts. Judiciary, but Wizarding Britain has, for reasons that elude me, simply delegated all those vital responsibilities to the goblins while maintaining a continually hostile and bigoted relationship with them. It's really quite baffling." Harry nodded slowly as he absorbed this information. He had taken the concept of Gringotts Bank for granted, but now he wondered what Gringotts truly was and why wizards tolerated it. "So how are you handling Justin's money?" "The prince's money is being left in place for now. We've discussed with Severus the possibility of investing in a new apothecary in Hogsmeade and hiring some of his former students who have struggled to find work as potioneers with existing firms due to blood status. Malcolm's voice dripped with condescension on those last two words. We've also quietly opened a small vault in Barbara's name since Justin's unique status elevates her to being considered a squib. We had about £10,000 converted into galleons to store. Mainly, we want to figure out how the exchange rate works. That's another thing. Unlike Gringotts, Muggle banks do not have a monopoly on printing currency, nor are they responsible for setting the exchange rate with other currencies. And then there's this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single galleon and a gold money clip from which he removed a wad of cash. He handed them both to Harry, who noticed the money clip bore the crest of the dukedom of Forgill. "Which of those is heavier?" the Muggle asked. Harry hefted one item in each hand. "The money clip by a little bit, I think. But they're pretty close to the same." "I concur. Now what interests me is this: I am assured by the goblins that the galleon is pure gold, whatever that means in magical terms, while the money clip is 24-karat gold, which is as pure as Muggles can make it. And yet, the galleon is worth about £5 sterling, while the money clip retails at £750 and, if melted down, would still be worth about £400 as just a lump of gold. In theory, one could convert £5 into one galleon, melt the galleon down into gold, and then sell it for about £400. Multiply that by, say, £10,000 converted to galleons, and you could make millions through currency manipulation. So why has no one ever done that?" Harry asked, amazed at the implications of this. "Well, for one thing, galleons can't be melted down." "I know, I've tried. And with a blowtorch, no less. All it got me was a hot galleon and an angry elf from Gringotts advising me that attempts to manipulate the integrity of Gringotts-issued currency would invoke severe penalties. Understandably, I won't be trying that again until I find out more about how wizarding economics work." He chuckled. "Which is why I put up with Lucius Malfoy's eccentricities. In the meantime, we're focusing on looking for investment opportunities, though we're taking it slow as we don't want to step on any ancient and noble toes, as it were." Harry thought for a moment. "Sir Malcolm, are you aware that the wizarding world has no commercially available magic that functions as video recording technology? That is, of a sort that's comparable to TV cameras?" Malcolm snorted. "I am aware that they have the wizarding wireless, so-called because it doesn't actually have any wires in it at all. And that the most common form of entertainment consists of sitting around said wizarding wireless while listening to news reports, insipid radio soap operas, and appallingly bad music." The discussion suddenly gave Malcolm a flashback to the first time he had heard Celestina Warbeck singing A Cauldron Full of Hot, Strong Love. He had first assumed it was a deliberate parody of Shirley Bassey since the tune was obviously cribbed from A Foggy Day in London Town. He shuddered at the memory. "As far as visual recording goes, I know that Omniacula's sell for 30 galleons, don't have sound, can't hold more than 2 hours of video footage, and can't store that footage for more than a week. Have I forgotten anything?" Speaking hypothetically, Harry said casually, "If someone invented a kind of magical video camera that could float under its own power, move in the direction of the user, and record up to 12 hours of both video and sound, which could then be transferred to a storage medium, would that be something you'd be interested in investing in?" Malcolm studied the boy carefully while rubbing his chin. "Hypothetically? Yes, I would be very interested. Do you have a hypothetical prototype?" "Hypothetically, yes. We're hoping to have several ready by the Quidditch World Cup so we can record the matches and perhaps resell them. Of course, I have no idea about the legality of recording the cup without permission, so we're taking it slow." Malcolm chuckled. "From what I've seen, wizarding intellectual property rights are absurd, but if you don't object, I'll consult with Lucius about it." "No objections from me. If we're going to have this ready by the time the cup starts, we'll probably need all the help we can get." "Understood. I hope I speak for Justin when I say I look forward to working with you." Harry's eyes widened slightly at that, and he hesitated before responding. Malcolm noticed. "Perhaps," the Muggle said gently, "this might be a good time to segue into those other things." Harry nodded and took a deep breath. Forgive me for being so direct, Sir Malcolm, but what do you think of me? As a person, I mean. Malcolm nodded and chose his words carefully. I must admit, when we first met, I didn't much care for you. In fact, I disliked you rather intensely. So much so that we forbade Justin from participating in your summer lessons program and only allowed him to visit the Zabinis if we could come along. But then, when I met you at the airport, I felt none of that prior dislike. And over the past few days, my views have completely changed. I now find myself quite impressed with you and grateful for the positive influence you've had on my son. Barbara feels the same way. He paused to take a sip of coffee. Can I assume that magic was involved in my changed feelings? He asked mildly. Harry grimaced. You can. I don't know what it was exactly. It's been an issue for a long time. And if it's all the same, I'd rather not get into the details. But I went through some things at the end of last term, and now it seems to be dormant. Or at least resting. Seems to be. Harry shrugged. There's no practical way to test it except for walking up to a Muggle to see if he snarls at me. Then I suppose we shall treat this Sunday as a test of sorts, Malcolm said thoughtfully. Sunday? Harry asked. Yes, the man replied as he reached into his pocket to pull out a brown envelope. It was supposed to be a birthday surprise from Justin, but I suspect now you'll want to know in advance what you're getting into. I purchased tickets for our entire group to Euro Disney. Harry's eyes widened as Malcolm continued. I understand if you have reservations about going, given what you just told me. But if you think this phenomenon is now dormant, this might be a good way to find out for sure. If you can make it through a day at a Disney theme park filled with Muggles, I would think that would be solid evidence that the effect has ended. The boy's eyes lit up. The Dursleys once took Dudley to Euro Disney while he was left behind with the cat lady for 3 days. He had always dreamed of seeing the park for himself. Harry smiled and thanked his future business partner for the generous gift. Elsewhere in the Quartier Magique, Alexander not deadpanned. Seriously, you got remarried? And didn't even let me know in advance. To be perfectly frank, boy, sneered Alex's father, Alex, I assumed that if you came, you'd create some ridiculous spectacle. I would not want my bride embarrassed on her wedding day by your childishness. Alex laughed. Oh, I would never have come to your wedding, father. I'm just astonished I had to read about it in the newspapers. You could have at least sent me an owl. Huh? I wasn't sure you knew what owls were. You haven't sent me one since last summer. No, I haven't. That damnable ultimate sanction might have made me hate Theo, but it did nothing to change my contempt for you. Tiberius snarled, his hand twitching towards his wand. Alex mirrored the action. But before either could unleash a spell, a silvery voice called out, instantly capturing their attention. Boys, 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 cooed Narcissa not. Please show some decorum. We are all family now, after all. Biologically, I suppose, Alex muttered, not breaking eye contact with his father. And not even that in your case. Tosh, dear boy, she continued. My cozy little Parisian apartment has several bedrooms. Why don't you withdraw to one of them and calm yourself? We can discuss these matters later over dinner. I regret, Lady Not, that I have other plans. Alex lifted his chin defiantly. I'm only in Paris to watch some of my friends from school in the dueling tournament at St. Germain. I found out about your presence here merely through happenstance. Then he stepped closer to Tiberius. And I have also learned that Theo No Name is in Paris as well. I hope for your sake, father, that you have not chosen Paris as a honeymoon spot as part of some plot against him. Your unbreakable vow still stands. As does yours, brat. Tiberius shot back. And do not presume that your heirship will protect you from my wrath if you continue to defy me. Tiberius, Narcissa said sharply. She placed a hand on her new husband's arm. Shoulder and all the fight seemed to drain out of him. She turned her gaze towards Alex. Alexander, I assure you. We had no idea that Theo No Name would be in Paris at this time. We chose this as our honeymoon spot because I own this apartment here in the Magic Quarter. We have no intention of acting against your former brother and his friends." Alex glared at her for referring to Theo as his former brother, but she turned back to Tiberius and kissed him on the cheek. "Tiberius, darling, why don't you step into another room for a few moments and let me talk with our son?" Tiberius quivered. "Of course, my love." Alex shuddered at the display, while his father stiffly exited the room. Narcissa regarded Alex almost indulgently, as if his outbursts were nothing more than a child's tantrum. She moved closer to him. "Oh, Alex, you must not provoke your father so. Despite your anger, we are still a family. Indeed, now that I am a part of your family, I hope I can provide a mediating influence between you and your father." She reached up and gently caressed his cheek. "It's been so long, hasn't it, since you've had someone to call mother?" Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her hand away with a snarl. "My mother was Christina Fenwick Knott. And she is irreplaceable." He took a step back and regarded her coldly. "And you should probably be warned, the Durmstrang Dark Arts curriculum includes learning how to resist your allure." Narcissa's gentle motherly facade fell away, replaced with an icy mask. "You do not know of what you speak, Alexander." The young man sniffed disdainfully. "Once again, I wish you happiness in your nuptials. May you be exactly the kind of wife my father deserves. Now, if you will excuse me, my friends are waiting for me." Without another word, he turned and stalked towards the door to the apartment. But before he could grab the handle, Narcissa spoke again. "I wonder, Alexander, if your resistance to my charms is truly due to your Durmstrang education. Or perhaps there is another reason." Alex did not respond or even turn around. He yanked the door open and left. Narcissa sighed in disappointment. "It is a pity," she thought to herself. Turning the knot now would have simplified things later. She placed her hand gently against her stomach. Fortunately, another option for Tiberius's heir will present itself soon. That afternoon back at Hogwarts, if Severus Snape had been more open about his feelings, he might have admitted to Dumbledore his anxiety about reading what Damocles Belby had to say to him. In his shame over his actions as a Death Eater, Snape never spoke to Belby before the man's death a few years after the fall of the Dark Lord. He feared that someone he respected would condemn him for his sins and, worse, for his wasted potential. While Dumbledore assumed the letter contained praise from the deceased master, Snape was less optimistic and almost afraid of what message Belby might have left for him from beyond the grave. The envelope sat unopened on Snape's desk for most of the day as he found excuses to procrastinate. Finally, late that afternoon, he ran out of things to do. Annoyed at his own timidity, he took a moment to analyze his feelings and used his occlumency to organize them. Reluctantly, he sat down at the desk and opened the envelope. Inside were 4 pages of parchment in Belby's familiar handwriting, along with a much smaller envelope about 4 by 6 inches in size. The front of the mini envelope read, "Read the letter first." With a shrug, Snape set the smaller envelope aside and began to read Damocles Belby's final words for him. When he finished, he read it again. After finishing his second read-through, Snape leaned back in his chair and rubbed his hands across his face. He picked up the smaller envelope to open it but hesitated. For nearly a minute, he simply stared at it, as if opening it might unleash something irreversible. The former Death Eater took a deep breath before setting the small envelope aside. He summoned a bottle of fire whiskey from his quarters along with a glass big enough for a double shot, which he downed without hesitation. Once the burn faded from his throat, Snape read through the last paragraph of Belby's letter one final time. He then wadded the entire letter into a ball and threw it toward the center of the room. Incendio! The letter ignited in midair, leaving only a fine ashy powder to settle on the floor, which quickly vanished. Honestly, the spy thought to himself as he reached for the bottle once more, glaring at the tiny sealed envelope. Sometimes, I think the life I've led is just ridiculous. That night, back in Paris, Harry and his friends found the open class finals electrifying. 16 teen duelists, most of whom were far beyond the novice champion, stood before him. Of course, that would change in time. By winning the novice championship, Harry would automatically advance to open class the next time he stepped onto a dueling floor. To succeed there, he would need to nearly double the list of competition-approved spells he had memorized. He looked forward to it, but that was for the future. The rest of Harry's summer was fully booked, and he had until Christmas at least to prepare for open class competition. For now, he was content to watch and learn from his future peers. Giles Yaxley was as fearsome a competitor as Harry had anticipated, but there were others just as impressive, including Petrovich and Zedescu from Durmstrang. Eve, Machado, and Delica were all from Beauxbatons. The two Americans, Sinclair and Madison, had just graduated from the Blacksburg Maggery Institute, which is Wizarding America's equivalent to West Point or Sandhurst. Fleur Delica, who was Blaze's mysterious acquaintance, reached the semi-final round but unexpectedly lost 3-2 to Olga Zedescu. This outcome surprised Harry. While Zedescu was an imposing and aggressive duelist, Harry found her way of snarling her incantations quite intimidating. In contrast, Delica was far more graceful and precise. After Delica won the first 2 rounds easily, Harry expected her to advance to the finals without difficulty. However, Fleur's dueling coach, identified by Blaze as her mother, Apolline Delica, called for a timeout. There was a brief exchange between them, and when it ended, Fleur looked decidedly angry. It was unclear if her anger contributed to her losing 3 straight rounds to her Durmstrang rival, but Harry had his theories. The first 2 losses were subtle enough to go unnoticed, but when Fleur deliberately stepped into the path of a disarming jinx she should have dodged easily, Harry couldn't ignore it. Giles Yaxley also lost in the semi-final round, so Harry had no personal knowledge of the 2 finalists beyond what he had heard in gossip. Olga Zedescu was a Romanian dueling prodigy and the daughter of an aura from Bucharest. The American, Randolph Sinclair, had achieved the rank of Mage Lieutenant in the Junior Regimental Officer Corps before graduating from Blacksburg the previous term. He was among the 4th generation of the Sinclair family to serve as an officer in the Confederation's wizarding military. The duel between Zedescu and Sinclair was fast-paced, taking about 10 minutes to complete, with Zedescu ultimately defeating her American rival. All eyes on the gold and silver medalists, but Harry's focus was on the girl from Beauxbatons. He was pretty sure she had deliberately thrown her semi-finals match. After the open class finals concluded, everyone moved from the grand ballroom to one of the hotel's restaurants, reserved for a reception for all the open class and novice competitors. As a minor celebrity due to his own championship, Harry found himself surrounded by people eager to make his acquaintance and even get his autograph. I wonder if this is what Jim feels like whenever a new Boy Who Lived book comes out, he thought to himself while signing an official tournament program. He navigated through the crowd to approach Fleur Delica, though he wasn't entirely sure why he wanted to. On one hand, he felt an odd attraction to her, but on the other hand, something about her was mildly off-putting. He was only slightly surprised when Blaze suddenly appeared beside him, eager to make introductions. "If I may, Harry," Blaze said, turning to Delica. "Mademoiselle Delica, please allow me to introduce Hadrian Remus Black Lord Wilkes. Harry, may I present to you, Mademoiselle Fleur Delica of the Paris Delacours. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mademoiselle Delica. But please, call me Harry," he said. She looked down at him, and Fleur Delica was at least 5 inches taller than Harry, with a bemused expression. "Ah, but of course," Delica replied with an exuberant smile, tinged with a hint of smugness. "You are the little boy who won the novice competition. To be so talented at such a young age. Très magnifique." Harry winced slightly at being called the little boy but decided to let it pass. Almost. He also noticed that Delica had not invited him to use her first name. "Thank you. And your own performance was most impressive. I felt sure you had. Zedescu is all taken care of, but regrettably, she was able to make a comeback." Fleur's smile faded slightly. "Yes, she was. I have dueled Zedescu before." "She is?" Fleur paused, gesturing with her hands as if searching for the right words. "She is the most formidable. As you progress from novice to the open class and gain more experience, you will learn never to underestimate any opponent. I'll try to remember that, Harry replied, his tone slightly sarcastic. Of course, one thing I've truly enjoyed about attending this tournament, aside from winning my own bracket, of course, is having the chance to meet great duelists like you and learn from your experience and techniques. Fleur's laugh sparkled. How charming you are. Please, ask your questions, if you please. Blaise stood silently between them, glancing back and forth as if he suddenly realized he was caught between two predators, unsure of who was hunting whom. Harry took a half-step closer so only Fleur and Blaise could hear. You're very kind, Mademoiselle Delica, he began, bowing his head respectfully. But mainly, I was simply curious about your last round. Why did you step to the right and move directly into the path of Zedescu's Jinx? You had done a flawless job of reading her moves up until then. It almost looked like you had to change direction to move into the path of that spell that would have otherwise missed you completely. Now, it was Fleur's turn to take a half-step closer to Harry. While her smile remained charming, there was a flash of something dangerous in her eyes that made Blaise swallow hard. Are you serious? She exclaimed. Do you mean to accuse me of, how do you say in English, throwing the match? Absurd. She laughed again, and as she did, both Blaise and Harry felt something unnatural wash over them. It was a sensation that would have turned most young men their age into babbling fools. Blaise, who had known Fleur Delica for years, was prepared for her influence and trained to resist it. Harry, on the other hand, was simply being himself. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to glaze over, but then he shook his head sharply and studied Fleur again with a more discerning gaze. Absurd, he said quietly. Perhaps. But I really do think you intentionally threw the match with Zedescu. He then gave her his most intimidating smile. Just as I believe your English is much better than you let on. Fleur's smile faded instantly. Oh, and by the way, he continued, that thing you're doing? I'd appreciate it if you stopped. The surprise widened in her eyes. That thing I'm doing. She glanced quickly at Blaise, who shrugged as if to say, don't look at me. I didn't say anything. Yes, Harry said amiably. That thing. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So please stop it. Or I might mistake your intentions, Mademoiselle Delica. And I'm sure neither of us would want that. Fleur was silent for a moment, but gradually her strange aura receded, and Harry's heart rate returned to normal. Then she turned to Blaise and smiled. It was the first genuine smile Harry had seen on her face all day. Well, 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 Fleur said in flawless English with a barely detectable French accent. My congratulations, Blaise. Your friend has captured my curiosity. And now, he has my attention. Without another word, Fleur turned and disappeared into the crowd. Let me guess, Harry said as he took another sip of champagne. You can't say anything else until your mum has read my cards, right? Blaise nodded as he watched Fleur Delica rejoin her mother and leave the reception. Nearby, Theo had just snatched another few deviled eggs. A thing for younger guys. Just my luck. Theo chuckled, shaking his head. That sounds like a nightmare. But hey, at least you're not stuck with her for long. Alex rolled his eyes. True, but I can't help but feel sorry for you. You've been through so much. Theo sighed. Yeah, well, it's not like I had a choice in any of it. But I'm working on moving forward. Good. That's all you can do, Alex said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Just remember, no matter what, I'm here for you. Even if the magic says otherwise. Theo smiled, appreciating the sentiment. Thanks, Alex. That means a lot. Now, come on. Let's get some more food before you eat all the deviled eggs, Alex said, nudging him playfully. Deal, Theo replied, feeling a sense of camaraderie returning as they headed back towards the buffet together. Vila Allure explains why father is acting like he's going through puberty again. It's disgusting. Vila Allure. Alex grimaced. There's a thing you can do, Most wizards consider it dark magic, but not necessarily. It depends on whether you see Veela as people or not. Anyway, you can harvest certain organs from a live Veela and use them to make a potion that makes a witch supernaturally attractive. That's how Narcissa got her hooks into father, I suppose. Theo nodded. So, you don't think Tiberius is going to try for another heir, do you? Alex shrugged dismissively. Honestly, I hope he does. He can't sanction me, and I don't even know if I'd mind getting kicked out of the family. But it'll take a while if they go that route. At least 9 months to give birth, and then it has to be a male, and it'll take a few years to show magic. I'm pretty sure I can finish my mastery by then, and after that, the bastard can disown me for all I care. Their conversation was interrupted when Giles Yaxley, one of Alex's classmates, walked over. Not, old bean. Father is taking me, Albert, and some of our friends out to Le Chabanais to celebrate our part of the tourney being over. You're welcome to join us. Alex demurred. Thank you for the invitation, Yaxley. But I have already made other plans. A. Your loss. You know how those French birds are though, what? With a rude laugh, Yaxley turned and left. Friend of yours? Theo asked. Alex sighed. No, but he's not really an enemy, at least not yet. I'm hoping to keep it that way until after graduation. Well, he invited you to dinner with his family, so that's something. Is Le Chabanais a good restaurant? Alex coughed and blushed slightly. To be honest, it's not really a restaurant at all. More of a bordello. Theo's eyes widened. I'm not sure whether an invitation to a place like that counts as a sign of friendship or not. Later, in the Delica suite, Fleur scrubbed angrily at her makeup while her mother, Apolline, gently combed her hair into tightly woven French braids. Something troubles you, daughter? Apolline asked, already knowing the answer. Fleur had been angry since losing her match against Zedescu. She had changed out of her dueling clothes and now wore form-fitting jet-black trousers and enchanted boots, though her top resembled a Muggle sports bra. The rest of her evening ensemble lay on the bed, waiting for her. Fleur glared at her reflection in the mirror. I could have beaten her, Mama, she said with quiet intensity. You know I could have. Her and the American both. Could have? Yes. But should have? You know better than that, Sherry. Apolline had finished braiding her daughter's hair and rested her hands on Fleur's shoulders. Fleur stood up angrily. Do I, Marmon? I have done everything you and Papa have asked. I never went out for Quidditch. For 7 years, I have strictly maintained a class placement between 10th and 15th, though I could easily have scored much higher. I had the skills to be a champion duelist, but I have never been allowed to finish better than 4th. I'm 17 and not even permitted to date. It's not fair. With a huff, she rose from her chair, snatched up the black long-sleeved top, and pulled it on while her mother looked at her sadly. No, Sherry, it is not fair. But you know why it is necessary. You know the secrets we Delacours hold and why, and one of those secrets is you. You and your sister. You cannot draw too much attention to your abilities, or we shall all pay the price. Apolline picked up the last item of clothing from the bed, a small black cloth, and held it out for Fleur. We both know, Fleur, that you deserve a place in the sun. But the family. France needs you. And so, for a while longer at least, you must continue to hide in the shadows, Fleur said. She said nothing more, simply snatching the black balaclava from her mother's hand and pulling it over her forehead. A soft ding from the mirror on the nightstand interrupted the moment. Apolline picked it up and tapped it twice. Behind her, Fleur angrily pulled on a pair of black leather gloves. A man's voice came from the mirror. They've just entered Le Chabanais. You've got 2 hours, 3 at the most. Apolline turned to her daughter and nodded. Fleur sniffed in disdain before pulling the balaclava down to cover her face and adjusting the enchanted night vision goggles that came with it. Alan's enfants de la patrie, she muttered ruefully under her breath as she headed for the balcony. Moments later, a shadow as black as night climbed onto the balcony ledge and jumped easily from one balcony to the next. Within seconds, Fleur reached the gap between balconies where the hotel's exterior glass lift ascended and descended. After a short wait, the lift stopped on the 5th floor, and she gently stepped onto its roof. The lift resumed its ascent, and soon its hidden passenger reached her destination, a recessed area at the top where the machinery that powered the lift was concealed. Carefully, she braced her hands against one wall and her feet against the opposite wall. Moments later, the lift began its descent, leaving Fleur Delica suspended in midair atop a 10-story lift shaft. Unperturbed, Fleur turned her attention to the far end of the hotel, where a large flagpole bearing the flag of magical France extended out from the building. She pointed her wand at the end of the pole. Carpe retractum. Instantly, a thin rope shot out of her wand and wrapped around the pole. She jumped away from her position in the open-air lift shaft and allowed herself to swing. Fleur used the magic of the conjured rope to pull herself toward the flagpole, which she easily caught with her free hand. Effortlessly, she climbed up and tightrope walked along the flagpole to the edge of the building before dropping down onto the balcony below. Instantly, Fleur disillusioned herself. Her jet-black infiltration suit should have made it impossible for anyone to see her, but she was not one to take foolish risks while on the job. With the easy part of the evening behind her, she knelt at the door connecting the balcony to the hotel room and cast several spells to reveal the rooms that maintained the high-level security wards for which the top-floor suites of Eitel St. Germain were renowned. Bypassing them took nearly 10 minutes, which, by Fleur's standards, was a frightfully long time. But once she succeeded, she was inside. Before stepping too far into the room, Fleur tapped her goggles 3 times. Instantly, every magical or enchanted item in the room glowed softly. She smiled. As she had expected, her target would have placed his strongest defenses on his most valuable possessions, revealing their locations to anyone capable of sensing magic directly. It took only a few more minutes to neutralize the protective wards and open the closet door. Inside hung exactly what she was looking for, a long coat favored by British auras and hit wizards. Attached to the lapel was a brass badge that read Corban Yaxley, Director, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Fleur carried the badge over to a nearby desk and set to work. After half an hour spent carefully removing the back of the badge, she produced a sheet of parchment bearing a complex rune sequence. Using a silvery tool created especially for that purpose, she began to etch the runes onto the piece she had removed. The etching took another hour, and when she finished, she pulled a small mirror from her pocket and tapped it 3 times. Sparrow to nest. Ready for transmission test, Fleur said. Proceed, replied the male voice that had spoken to Apolline earlier. Fleur set the mirror aside and addressed Yaxley's badge. Allo, all you British chaps, Fleur said, adopting a parody of a British upper-class accent. This is Corban Yaxley, Death Eater and all-around baddie, speaking to you live from his overpriced hotel room in beautiful Paris, France. I can't answer your call right now, as I'm probably out murdering a Muggleborn or something. Communication received loud and clear, the voice from the mirror responded. Though I'm not sure that a Death Eater's hotel room is the right place to engage in such levity, my dear. Well, Papa, Fleur replied crisply. Since I am the one risking my life by breaking into the Death Eater's hotel room, I think I shall be the one to decide whether levity is appropriate, non. There was a pause. You're mad at me over having to throw the dueling tournament, aren't you, pumpkin? Furious, she answered dryly, but not so much that I'll go off target during a mission. Now hush, so that I can finish this. It's been a long day, and I wish to have a hot bath and go to bed. A few seconds of deep laughter followed. That's my little matter, Harry. I'll make it up to you someday, I promise. 20 minutes later, Yaxley's DMLE badge was back in one piece and hanging once more on the man's long coat. Fleur took another 10 minutes to search the rest of the suite, just in case. Her thoroughness paid off when she discovered a locked and magically sealed attaché case, which she opened without difficulty. Inside, there appeared to be little of interest, mainly security arrangements about something called a Tri-Wizard tournament, whatever that was. Fleur reviewed it all as thoroughly as time would permit. Others would analyze the intelligence later from her pensive memories. 90 minutes later, Corban Yaxley and his 2 sons entered their suite, all in varying degrees of intoxication. Case, feeling the thrill of having lost his virginity at 15 in the most famous brothel in magical Paris. Naturally, there was no sign that anyone had been in their rooms during their absence. Fleur Delica had been thoroughly trained in espionage, just like her mother before her. Chapter 4, Happy Birthday, Harry and Jim. The front lawn of Potter Manor. July 30th, 1994. As Jim Potter surveyed the house that had been his home for just shy of 14 years, his stomach churned with mixed emotions. For the first time in his life, Jim was on this property as a guest. No, not a guest, he thought ruefully. And here is the entertainment. Despite the many reversals the Potter family had suffered over the last few months, Jim Potter's birthday remained a national holiday. The Jim Potter Birthday Gala was still one of the most important charity events of the year. Now, however, the charitable trust that had been set up in Jim's name was no longer under the control of the Potter family. Instead, it was managed by a board of directors appointed by Harry Black. The newly appointed board had already begun making changes. One change was that this year's gala would be held on July 30th since it was a Saturday. Another was that the event and the grounds were open to the public, though the house itself was locked up tight, instead of being invitation only. Security for the event was stringent, but Jim was still uncomfortable seeing so many people on the grounds of his family's former estate. His parents would never have allowed anyone inside the wards if they had still been in charge. At least none of them can get into the house, the birthday boy muttered to himself as Lord Parkinson, a known Death Eater, strolled by nonchalantly. In addition to its usual offering to St. Mungo's, this year's gala was also said to raise funds for the ongoing repairs to the ministry complex needed after Pettigrew and Rookwood's dramatic escape. It would also provide financial support to the families of those who were killed or seriously cursed by the Death Eaters in the same incident. Both of Jim's parents were in attendance, but this year, James wasn't the host. Instead, he was part of the security. Unlike Jim's more recent birthdays, few of his friends were on hand. The Weasleys were all there. In fact, so far this year, the Weasleys had spent more time at Potter Manor than Jim himself. For the most part, the others were helping Molly in the kitchen, preparing the lavish catering Harry had ordered. The only exception was Percy, who attended with his new boss, Barty Crouch, the director of International Magical Cooperation. Jim spent most of the day sitting at a table next to a stack of books, including Jim Potter and the Mystery of the Aztec Warrior, the latest entry in the Boy Who Lived series. As part of this year's celebration, Jim would spend several hours personally autographing copies for anyone willing to donate 20 galleons to the cause. He thought angrily, I feel like Gilderoy Bloody Lockhart. Then, to his shock and barely restrained outrage, the next person in line was Lucius Malfoy, who casually dropped 100 galleons in exchange for 5 books. Early Christmas presents for dear friends, the former Death Eater said with a smirk. Jim fought down the urge to respond in a way that might cause a scene. As he dutifully autographed the books, he could barely keep his hands from shaking in anger. To add to his amazement, after Malfoy banished his books back to Malfoy Manor with a wave of his wand, he moved off to meet with Arthur Weasley, chatting amiably with his former mortal enemy, and James's boss, for several minutes as if they were old friends. Not for the first time in recent months, Jim wondered when the whole world had gone mad. Earlier that morning, he had participated in his usual birthday press conference. Most of the questions were fielded by Lady Augusta Longbottom, the chair of the charity's board of directors. She handled the press conference quite ably, allowing Jim to answer only a few questions. Augusta had laid out strict ground rules that forbade any inquiries about Peter Pettigrew. That said, Jim had been surprised when Rita Skeeter asked some pointed questions about his current living arrangements, as he and his family clearly no longer resided at the Manor House. Caught off guard, Jim stammered a brief statement about living in a Muggle neighborhood due to security concerns. He mentioned that he was now in the home that had once belonged to his aunt, Petunia Dursley. Before he could continue, Augusta quickly interrupted to change the subject. Rita then asked about Jim's brother, the new Lord Wilkes, noting that he and Jim shared a birthday. Augusta replied that Harry Black was in France, as his birthday coincided with his first dueling competition. She also reminded the press that Harry had won his divisional championship 2 nights before. He and his friends, including Augusta's grandson, would privately celebrate Harry's 14th birthday while enjoying the sights of Paris. However, she was somewhat evasive about what specific sights they would explore. The birthday gala ended an hour after sunset, with the fireworks being the only part of the day that Jim truly enjoyed. At Harry's recommendation, the board had contracted the Weasley twins to provide a fireworks show. While shooting small fireworks from one's wand was child's play, the idea of a Muggle-style display, complete with massive multicolored explosions lighting up the night sky, was new to the purebloods in attendance. They were awestruck by the specially enchanted fireworks that manifested as flaming dragons, winged stallions, and other magical flying beasts, culminating in a colossal explosion that spelled out "Happy Birthday, Jim Potter." As the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, Molly Weasley leaned in close to her mischievous twins. "How much did the board pay you to put on this show again?" she asked, just loud enough for them to hear over the spectacle. "About 50 galleons," Fred replied. "And how much did it cost you to produce all this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. George grinned and said, "Just under 20. Molly sighed contentedly and patted both twins on the back. "Shoulder. Good boys," she said with a warm smile. Later that night, Rita Skeeter wrote several owl posts, sealing them in secure envelopes before sending them off into the night. The envelopes were addressed to a half-dozen different people, but the letters inside all conveyed the same message. Urgent. Give me any information you can on the status and location of a Muggle named Petunia Dursley. Meanwhile, in France, the world-class dueling championship concluded that same night. Harry found the caliber of competition both astonishing and daunting. For novice and open-class duelists, there was a long list of permissible spells. However, for the world-class competitors, there was a rather short list of forbidden spells. Harry recognized Fiend Fire and the 3 Unforgivables, but the other banned spells were too obscure for him to have even heard of. In a change of format, the world-class competition used Bulgarian rules instead of French rules. Among other differences, this meant that instead of a rectangular dueling platform, the duel took place in a large circular zone. This design provided the competitors with more freedom of movement, and dodging played a much bigger role in the duelists' tactics. The dueling area was filled with stone columns, which the duelists used for transfiguration attacks, and all of them made spectacular use of these features. None of the duels approached the ferocity or ingenuity shown by Voldemort in the memories that Alastair Moody had shown Harry the previous December. However, some of them were definitely on par with Bellatrix Lestrange during her misdemeanor days. Within seconds of each match's commencement, the dueling area was quickly filled with wild animals of all kinds, some of which were made of fire, flashing bolts of lightning, flying blades that pursued duelists who attempted to dodge, and even stranger attacks. To make things even more interesting, apparition was legal in world-class duels. Many of the combatants spent their duels constantly apparating around the arena to gain the upper hand on their opponents. The eventual winner was the hometown favorite, an older French wizard named Julien Montmorency. His victory marked his 17th international championship win. Harry thought the name sounded vaguely familiar, and Blaise filled him in on the family's history. The House of Montmorency was an ancient French pureblood house known for its connection to the dark arts. Most notably, the infamous Gilles de Rais was a member of this family in the 15th century. Once a patron of Joan of Arc in his youth, de Rais apparently went mad in his later years and was executed for dark magic and other unspecified crimes. Blaise was evasive, but the fact that Muggle historians considered him a prolific serial killer spoke volumes. The scandal ruined the family's reputation, leading the remaining Montmorencys to expatriate to Britain during the French Revolution. During the Grindled conflict, the remaining Montmorency siblings, Alphonse and Vivienne, returned to France along with Alphonse's son Julien, who was still a teenager but already gifted with a wand. They played a vital role in organizing the French magical underground. After the war, the family remained in France, hoping to restore honor to the name Montmorency. Julien's international fame, gained from decades of success in the dueling arena, greatly aided them in that endeavor. After the tournament, there was yet another reception, and in an ironic twist, Harry found himself as the star-struck fan seeking an autograph from a dueling champion. To Harry's surprise, Montmorency recognized him immediately, remembering the boy's own impressive victory 2 nights earlier. They talked about dueling strategy for several minutes before the older wizard was pulled away to speak with other fans. Before leaving, he cryptically mentioned that he looked forward to talking to Harry again, adding with a wink, "and sooner than you might think." The next morning, Countess Zabini's group enjoyed an early breakfast delivered to the dining area of her suite before most of the group set out for Euro Disneyland. The young people were excited, but only Justin had visited the amusement park before. Even Blaise had not had the opportunity until now. The 5 teens would be escorted through the park by Archie Goodwin, Gunther Hagrid, and Bobby Latimer as their chaperones, while the Countess, Sirius, and the Finch-Fletchleys enjoyed a more leisurely morning on a nearby golf course. Sirius initially expressed some disappointment at not being able to spend Harry's birthday with his godson. However, after Archie described the thrills of Muggle roller coasters in vivid detail, he reluctantly agreed to let the kids have their fun, but only after sternly instructing his bodyguard to keep a close eye on the boys. The Countess Zabini reassured Harry that she would take care of his godfather. As the group made their last-minute preparations, Blaise pulled his mother aside. "You're going to look after Sirius Black, the second richest wizard in Britain?" Blaise asked quietly, a bit anxious. "He's my guest, Pa Sir Otto," the Countess replied calmly. "And to be fair, he's also a very handsome man." "Mama!" Blaise exclaimed. "Hush now," she interrupted firmly. "You know as well as I do that I am not afforded a choice in these matters." Blaise grimaced. "I know, but I still don't have to like it." At 9:30, the 5 boys and their 3 chaperones exited Gunther's van at a special VIP entrance to the park. This entrance was limited exclusively to magical guests. To Harry's dismay, he and the others had to surrender their wands, which were sealed away in special lockers along with both Harry and Blaise's portkeys. In exchange, they received special Disney pendants to wear. "Now, we have had no problems with wizarding guests since the park first opened 2 years ago," said the staff member, a French squib, who collected their magical property. "But just in case, if anything out of the ordinary happens and you feel unsafe, just grasp that. Hold the pendant firmly and say, 'When you wish upon a star.' This will immediately notify the park's magical personnel, and they will apparate to a nearby but discreet location to address whatever the problem is. The park is warded against apparition and portkeys for anyone who doesn't have special clearance." As Harry slipped the pendant around his neck and under his shirt, the park official continued. "In addition to summoning park personnel, the pendant also functions as a low-level notice-me-not charm. As long as you are not actively drawing attention to yourself, it will obscure references to magic and other casual comments that might come up in your conversations. However, we ask you to be mindful of the statute of secrecy at all times." The park official then asked each boy a series of questions. He inquired about their schooling, both magical and Muggle, when they last caused accidental magic, and whether they had any known allergies to Muggle food. Afterward, the squib opened a door, allowing the group to enter the happiest place on Earth. The park quickly lived up to its reputation. Justin had been here once before, and both Blaise and Bobby were at least familiar with the concept of an amusement park. However, Harry, Theo, and Neville had never experienced anything like it. Even Regulus joined in by purchasing a goofy hat for Sirius, much to Harry's amusement. Gunther tried to maintain a stern expression, but the effect was somewhat diminished by his cargo shorts and tight-fitting black polo shirt, which proclaimed his loyalty to the Juventus Football Club. The day had been thoroughly enjoyable, although Justin nearly exhausted himself explaining every cultural reference that the wizard-raised boys found baffling. "But why does Indiana Jones want to go into a temple of peril?" Neville asked, confused. "It's perilous. It's right there in the name." Despite the Longbottom heir's concerns, he ended up enjoying the park's newest roller coaster just as much as his friends. They rode it 3 times, even though Archie and Gunther felt increasingly nauseous. It was not until the 3rd ride, just after lunch, that something unusual happened. Harry's group approached the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril ride again, but this time, only 6 members could fit in the carts. "You boys go on ahead," Archie said, standing next to Gunther. "We'll be right behind you. Stay with Bobby and listen to him until we join you." After promising to do so, the 5 fourth years and their newly graduated chaperone boarded the carts. As Harry was being locked into a seat next to Neville near the front of the ride, he felt a sudden twinge in his forehead, as if warning him of a headache. To his surprise, he noticed the park employee who secured his seat giving him a strange and angry look. Almost as angry as the man in the cart in front of him, who glared furiously and pulled his daughter closer, as if afraid Harry meant her harm. Before Harry could react, the ride began. Unfortunately, he did not enjoy this third trip through Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril. Within seconds, an agonizing headache overcame him. Neville glanced at him with concern but then let out a scream as the track hit an inversion, flipping them upside down. Harry could barely notice or open his eyes due to the pain. No, he suddenly realized in shock. Not my head. It's coming from my scar. Less than 20 seconds later, the cart was pulling into the ride's conclusion and Neville turned back to his friend. "Harry, what's wrong? Why were you, bloody hell?" Neville's frightened shout broke through Harry's haze of pain. He pulled his hand away to look at Neville, only to widen his eyes in shock when he saw his hand covered in blood. "Harry!" Neville exclaimed. "Your scar. It's bleeding." By that point, the ride attendant had approached Harry and Neville's car to unlock it. "Murd," the man muttered under his breath as he noticed Harry's bloody face. "What has happened to you?" The Muggle's voice trailed off, replaced by an animalistic growl. Harry turned to look up at the park employee and gasped. The man's eyes had turned completely red. Before Harry could react, the attendant suddenly grabbed him by the neck and began choking him. With a shocked cry, Neville stood up and tried to shove the man away. Instead, he only succeeded in making the man pull back and drag Harry along, still throttling him. Neville and the other boys attempted to help their friend, but they were quickly pushed aside by the man sitting in front of Harry and a few other Muggles, all of whom immediately turned on Harry, screaming hysterically at him. All of them had glowing red eyes. "Monster! Tuesla Vite! Tuesla Freak!" Immediately, Theo and Neville jumped onto the backs of several Muggles who were kicking their friend in the ribs while the first man continued to choke Harry. Meanwhile, a panicked Blaze fumbled with his Euro Disney pendant. "There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Wrong children's film, mate." Justin shouted as he pulled out his own pendant and muttered, "When you wish upon a star." In a surprisingly Gryffindorish move, Bobby jumped over the cart and hurled himself into the fray. Bobby charged forward, slamming into the Muggle who was attacking Harry. Although rugby had never been his favorite sport, the Hufflepuff managed to knock the man away from a gasping Harry Black. However, another of the group of crimson-eyed Muggles struck Bobby from behind, sending him crashing to the ground. They then pushed the other children aside, grabbing Harry and lifting him high above their heads. "La tunnel! Les montagnes russes! Tuesla freak! Tuesla freak!" they shouted as they carried the struggling and screaming boy toward the entryway from which the returning carts emerged. Over the chants of "Tuesla freak! Tuesla freak!" Harry could hear the roar of the approaching roller coaster that carried Regulus and Gunther, drawing nearer. With a triumphant shout, the Muggles hurled Harry down the tunnel, directly into the path of the oncoming roller coaster. Although the cart was slowing down as it neared the end of its journey, it was still moving fast enough to seriously injure someone lying on the tracks. Gunther cursed loudly and gripped the bar that secured him and Archie inside the cart. With a groan of twisted metal, the bar ripped free from the cart and crashed to the side. "Go Goodwin!" Gunther yelled, practically throwing the wizard over the top of the cart in Harry's direction. The half-troll then twisted around, bracing himself as best he could, and slammed his left foot into the tracks beside the ride. The sudden sound of splintering wood and clanging metal followed, accompanied by screams from the people sitting behind Gunther as the entire cart began to shake violently, threatening to derail. So much for the statute of bloody secrecy, the half-troll muttered, grimacing as he prepared for what was to come. The group, this is not just a simple accident. We have a child injured and magic involved. We can't just sweep this under the rug. Leaflave rolled his eyes. And what do you propose we do? Investigate the roller coaster's feelings? The ministry wants this dealt with quietly. They don't want any more scandal. Gaudrell frowned, glancing between his two colleagues. But shouldn't we at least find out how the ride malfunctioned? There were Muggles involved who could have seen something. Let the Muggles think what they want, Leaflave said dismissively. The ministry has already decided. It's easier to let this be an accident than to stir up more trouble. Pittray crossed his arms, frustration evident on his face. And what about the boy? He was attacked. We can't ignore that. Leaflave leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Listen, Pittray. The less attention we bring to this, the better. We don't want to attract the eyes of those who could cause even more issues. Just let it go. As the tension in the room hung heavy, Gaudrell sighed. He could see both sides of the argument but felt the weight of the boy's injury pressing on him. What if we at least try to gather some information discreetly? For the boy's sake. Leaflave waved a hand, dismissing the suggestion. Do what you want, but don't expect me to back you up. The ministry has made its choice. With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving Gaudrell and Pittray to contemplate the unsettling circumstances surrounding the incident. The three men exchanged glances. I warned you this could happen. Besides the mysterious Lord Wilkes, two of the boy's friends are also heirs to families on the British Wizarding Council. A third is the son of the Countess Sabini. Leaflave snorted in contempt. As if I needed a reminder that the Black Widow is involved. I'm surprised none of the injured had recently married her. His rant was interrupted by a delicate cough from nearby. All three men turned to find a fourth man had entered the office so quietly that they hadn't noticed. He was a middle-aged wizard with slick black hair, wearing a dapper grey suit that would have looked impeccable to a Muggle from 1956. I apologize for interrupting, the man said mildly. But I couldn't help overhearing your distress, considering you were bellowing about it. He glanced around at the other agents. Can I assume, Inspector Leaflave, that you are upset about your superior's decisions regarding the incident at the amusement park? He chuckled amiably. As if Disneyland could ever be more unpleasant for a true Frenchman, n'est-ce pas? Leaflave ignored the cultural jab. You can assume whatever you like. It's none of your concern. Actually, mon ami, I believe I've taken a great interest in these affairs. Oh. Gaudrell said as he rose from his chair. And who are you exactly? But of course, gentlemen, the man replied, reaching into his jacket pocket. My credentials. Gaudrell glanced at the identity card the man handed over and immediately paled. He passed it to Leaflave, whose earlier anger melted away, replaced by a sudden nervousness. The surprisingly plain card identified the man as Gabriel Delica of Le Bureau de Lincoln was Magical France's answer to the Department of Mysteries. Leaflave coughed and adjusted his collar. Chevalier Delica, please forgive my outburst. I certainly meant no disrespect, he said. Non, speak no more about it, Inspector Leaflave, the unspeakable replied with an easy grin. I understand what it's like to suffer political interference in the course of one's work. I would never hold against you your frustrations of being denied the chance to do your jobs as you see fit. But there are unusual circumstances at play in this instance. As I'm sure my presence here now obviously indicates. Pittray rose and nodded respectfully at the man, now aware of his incredible influence and power, as well as his danger. Naturally, Chevalier, we are more than eager to assist Lincoln in whatever capacity you require, Pittray said, looking around the room. Aren't we, boys? He added firmly. Both Leaflave and Gaudrell immediately stammered their agreement. I am delighted to hear you say so. Delica exclaimed jovially. Happily, there are only a few quick matters to attend to, and then I can let you fine officers return to your normal duties. Suddenly, Delica's wand appeared from nowhere, and with a single swish, every scrap of paper in the office related to the Euro Disney investigation flew into the unspeakable's offhand and then burst into flames. Almost instantly, nothing was left but ash. "Excellent," Delica said. "Now only one thing remains. I'm sure I don't need to explain what's going to happen next, do I, Miss Amis?" The three investigators looked at one another helplessly. "No, Chevalier," Leaflave said dejectedly. "Good. Explanations bore me. Obliviate." 30 seconds later, Gabriel Delica, Chevalier de Elinkanu, was gone, and none of the three men he left behind remembered anything of the encounter. Had any recollection of his existence, let alone their conversation. None of the three remembered their brief investigation into the Euro Disney incident or that any such incident had even occurred. On a related note, Agent Leaflave now had a strong aversion to using the word bitched to refer to foreign dignitaries or in any context. Such behavior was inappropriate for a member of the French Ministry of Magic. Besides, one never knows when a relative of the person in question might be nearby. Meanwhile, back at the Hotel St. Germain, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, the Disney wizards healed Harry's minor injuries and cleaned the blood from his face. He and his party were quickly ushered out of the park and returned to their hotel rooms with instructions to remain there until investigators from the French ministry arrived to interview them. "I need to contact Sirius," said Archie Goodwin. Harry looked at his godfather sharply. "He needs to know what happened," the Metamorphmagus added firmly. "He is your godfather," Archie reminded him. "That would mean more if I weren't already emancipated," Harry snapped. "You know his health is fragile. If he finds out someone tried to kill me with a group of possessed muggles while he was out golfing, who knows what it will do to him?" At that, a still-shaken Blaise Zabini looked away as Harry continued. "I don't want to tell him anything more than we have to until we get back to London. Let's wait until after these investigators arrive." "The investigators won't be an issue," Blaise said quietly. "I made a call." "What sort of call?" young Latimer asked suspiciously. "Let it go, Bobby," Justin said dryly. "He's a Zabini. He knows people." "Whatever," Harry muttered. "I'm tired. I'm going to lie down for a while. If investigators show up, somebody wake me. If you hear for sure that Blaise's people, I have already made this go away. You can wake me up for that as well." The boy exited the main room, leaving Archie staring after him with a dark expression. Once in his bedroom, Harry paused in front of the mirror hanging over the dresser. He leaned forward to examine his reflection. Despite the healing magic used on him earlier, Harry noticed a faint redness in the rough outline of human hands, the marks left by the park employee who had gone mad and tried to strangle him. The man with the red eyes. Harry reached up and gently rubbed his scar. He couldn't recall it ever hurting much, let alone in the agonizing way it had earlier. "Well," he thought, "I used to get migraines when I was in first-year defense against the dark arts with Quirrell and Voldemort. But even that didn't hurt as much as whatever hit me today." He wondered for a moment if there might be a connection. He had received the scar as a footnote to Voldemort's failed attack on his family in 1981, a boring, jagged, and meaningless scar caused by falling debris, a parody of his more famous brother's scar. Still, he had gotten it that same night. Then, he remembered the eyes of the Muggles who had tried to kill him. They looked just like the red eyes Voldemort had in all those memories Moody let me watch. And the red eyes that Ron Weasley had while Riddle's diary Horcrux was possessing him. Harry looked again at the scar on his reflection's face. He rarely thought about it, or at least tried not to. Suddenly, he wondered if that had been a mistake. He leaned in to truly study his scar for the first time since he had begun working to master his natural legitimacy. His eyes narrowed in concentration. There is something about it. Or about the shape of it at least. It's not as jagged as I had always thought. And it's familiar too. Something I've seen a lot recently. Something I should know. What? It's right there. On the tip of my... Knock knock. "Harry, it's Archie. Can I come in? I have some news." Distracted by the knock, Harry moved to the door, momentarily forgetting about his scar. He opened it to let Archie in. Once inside, Archie shook his head and transformed back into the face of Regulus Black. "Well?" Harry asked tiredly. "Mr. Zabini reports that there will be no investigation. Apparently, his people have convinced the ministry to adopt the cover story that everything that happened was due to a malfunction in the roller coaster itself. The physical assault against you never happened." Reg grimaced in annoyance. "Also, Mr. Zabini still refuses to provide any information about who his mysterious people are and how much they know about us." He shook his head and tilted it to study Harry's demeanor. "Harry, what really happened back at the park?" Harry shrugged vacantly and turned away. "Come on, Harry. I was close enough to see those Muggles had unnaturally red eyes. They were clearly possessed and magically compelled to attack you. You have some idea of by whom or by what. Now work with me here. If nothing else, I need to know so that I can tell Sirius. Tell him nothing beyond the story the French ministry released. There was a minor accident on a roller coaster. I suffered some very minor injuries that healed within minutes, but we had to cut the day short." "Aha. So we should say nothing about you being physically assaulted and nearly killed by possessed Muggles with glowing red eyes." Harry winced. He had forgotten until just now that Regulus had been a Death Eater trainee before he defected and fled the country before he could be marked. Still, Regulus had met the Dark Lord. He had obviously noticed the possessed Muggles had glowing red eyes. But would he make the connection? "I'll tell both you and him everything I know when we're back home, Reg. I want Professor Snape and Healer Tonks there to answer any questions. They've both been studying this for a while." "This, what, Harry?" "This has happened before." Regulus shook his head. "Never like this. There is something about me, about my scar specifically, I think, that causes Muggles to dislike me. Or it did, anyway. But in the past, it was never this obvious." "Yes," Regulus said archly. "I would hardly call that fiasco subtle. So Snape and Tonks already know. Anyone else?" "Artemis Podmore and Hestia Jones. Also, Theo, Neville, and Hermione Granger." Harry grimaced suddenly. "And maybe Blaise and his mother. They both seem excessively interested in me, so it's possible they know about my condition." Regulus looked at Harry sadly. He had viewed himself as Harry's mentor since his time with Gilderoy Lockhart. But Harry was truly a Black now in every way that mattered under both magic and the law. He wasn't just Sirius's godson. He was family. "I'll hold off on telling Sirius as long as you promise that you will tell him soon. If nothing else, this should give him the impetus to take his oath to the Wizengamot as soon as possible so we can finally access Chevenoir and Grandfather's library. If this is a curse of any kind, I'm sure we can find an answer there." "Thank you," Harry said simply. Reg studied Harry for a moment. "Come here. I want to show you something. A little trick that might be helpful." He maneuvered Harry to face the mirror again. Then, he patiently talked Harry through the process of making the bruises around his throat slowly disappear using metamorphmagery. "You can heal injuries this way?" Harry asked in surprise. "It works best on minor cosmetic injuries. You're better off using a healing spell or a potion for nearly anything else. But I only know field medic level healing charms, and we don't have any bruise removal paste. As a metamorphmagus, you should be able to heal bruises like this one just by thinking about it." Harry nodded but remained silent, recalling all those minor cuts and bruises from his time at Privet Drive that seemed to heal so quickly. The Dursleys had called it his freakishness. When he was younger, he had once wondered if they might be nicer to him if he could just endure the pain longer. A few hours later, Sirius, the Countess, and Justin's parents finally returned. True to his word, Regulus said nothing to Sirius about the incident. However, from their reactions, Harry was sure that Blaise had informed the Countess, and he suspected Justin had mentioned it to his father. The Muggles seemed as friendly towards Harry as they had been before the trip to Euro Disney, but Sir Malcolm subtly changed the topic when Sirius's barrage of questions about the park made all the boys visibly uncomfortable. Later, as the group prepared for Harry's birthday dinner, Sir Malcolm pulled Harry aside. The boy tensed reflexively at the thought of being alone with a Muggle. But Sir Malcolm showed no signs of hostility. If anything, he appeared sad and contrite. "Harry," he said apologetically, "Justin told me the basics of what happened. I just wanted to say how sorry I am. I would never have sent you to a place so crowded with Muggles if I had known anything like that could happen." "It's all right, Sir Malcolm," Harry replied after glancing around to see if anyone was nearby. "Neither of us could have expected it. Most of the day was great. I'm really grateful for the chance to go. Just, except for that bit at the end." He laughed bitterly. "Our first 2 trips through the Temple of Peril were brilliant. Maybe that's what I get for trying to face the peril a 3rd time." Malcolm didn't laugh. Instead, he eyed Harry with concern. "The 3rd time," the boy said speculatively. "Tell me, Harry, can you think of anything different about that 3rd ride compared to the first 2? Harry shook his head slowly, but then an idea struck him. His eyes widened as he swallowed hard. "On the last ride, the one where everything went wrong, all of us kids were in one cart along with Bobby Latimer, who just graduated from school. The 2 adults were behind us in a separate car. We didn't have our wands. The first person to attack me tried to choke me, which also prevented me from using the pendant they gave us to call for wizarding aid." Malcolm went pale as the implication struck him as well. "In the future, Lord Wilkes," he said gravely, "I think it would be best if you did not meet with Barbara or myself, or indeed, any Muggles, without an adult wizard you trust on hand as well." Harry nodded slowly as the truth became clear. Whatever lay hidden in his scar, which he had taken to calling Bob during one of his rare frivolous phases, had not been dormant all these months. It had simply learned to wait for a good time to strike. Meanwhile, back at 4 Privet Drive, Jim concluded that it had been a good thing the official Jim Potter birthday gala had been scheduled for Saturday. For the first time in years, Jim's actual birthday was a private celebration for just family. Molly Weasley had sent a massive birthday cake with 14 candles to 4 Privet Drive, along with a hand-knitted jumper with a JP monogram. Both were delivered by Ron, who spent a few hours at Privet Drive visiting his friend before heading home. But the best present was the last thing Ron had to deliver, which he did with all due ceremony and pomp, an invitation for Jim to sit with the Weasleys at the final match of the Quidditch World Cup. Apparently, Arthur had done some favor for Ludo Bagman, and in recompense, the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports had provided finals tickets for the whole family. But as it turned out, Percy would be attending the games as Barty Crouch's new personal assistant. Molly had unexpectedly received a contract to cater Lucius Malfoy's tent, which meant they had extra tickets. Throughout the week, personal birthday gifts had been arriving via Al, separate from the formal gifts he received the day before, which were destined for charity. For Privet Drive was heavily warded to conceal the Potter family's presence from the wider magical community. However, these wards allowed some outposts to pass through, provided certain conditions were met. Most importantly, the sender had to be someone on a first-name basis with James, Lily, or Jim, and the package could not contain any dark or harmful magic. One of the wards, an obscure and highly intuitive one that Lily discovered and applied, even blocked outposts sent with any harmful intent, including non-magical intentions. Therefore, the only gifts that arrived by Al were from trusted friends. The entire Quidditch team contributed to new gear for their seeker, knowing his family's circumstances meant he couldn't buy new equipment himself. Hermione, of course, sent a book about an obscure magical creature Jim had never heard of. "Mum? What's a hobbit?" he asked. Lily explained that The Hobbit was a work of Muggle fiction, but one she believed Jim would enjoy despite its wildly inaccurate depictions of goblins, dwarfs, and trolls. Padma Potter sent a moving picture of a panoramic view of Shambhala, along with a letter expressing her regret that Jim couldn't return for a second year. She mentioned how much she had enjoyed their Wushido sparring sessions and hoped to continue them when they returned to Hogwarts. That sentiment made his stomach flutter for some reason. He was distracted from that odd feeling by the postscript to Padma's letter. By the way, do you know what happened to Brother Chandra? Mr. Lupin, I suppose. Jim said. I thought he was coming back here for the summer, but no one seen him. He frowned at that. He hadn't heard from Remus Lupin since leaving Hogwarts weeks earlier. And Godric, the owl he had sent to Shambhala with a letter for Remus, wouldn't have even reached the magical city by now, much less returned with any reply. Jim figured it would be a very angry owl that would come back in another week or so if Remus wasn't even in Shambhala to receive his letter. Jim's confusion deepened when an unfamiliar owl arrived later that afternoon. It bore a package with the initials RJL scrawled across the front. Quickly, Jim tore open the package to reveal yet another book, this one with a blank cover. Inside was a note. Happy birthday, Jim. I thought you might find this interesting reading. I'd recommend against letting anyone know you have it, however. Please don't tell me with any questions, as they probably wouldn't be the sort of questions you would want to be seen asking. I'll be in touch soon. Remus. What's that? Asked James. Jim turned to the first page and his eyes widened at the title. He cleared his throat. It's from Remus. It's about the history of Shambhala. Sounds interesting, James replied, his tone indicating he would probably not be asking to borrow the book for his own entertainment. Soon after, Jim left for his bedroom, where he sat down at his desk to open the book again. The title was, in fact, Animagery, The Deeper Mysteries, and it appeared to be someone's bound notes on the topic of becoming an animagus. Jim smiled, relieved to know that wherever Remus was, he was obviously safe and had the freedom to write and send packages, even if Jim was not to reply. Whatever Remus was up to, Jim was sure he'd hear all about it when school started back up. With a little luck, Jim would even be able to show him a completed and controlled transformation by then. As Jim opened the Animagery book and began to read, it didn't occur to him that he had never really seen Remus's handwriting before, so he wouldn't have recognized a forgery. He also didn't consider that someone else, who had once been on a first-name basis with his family and had no desire to harm him, could be involved. This person was an animagus himself and was interested in seeing Jim Potter follow in his footsteps. That night, back in Paris, after dinner, Harry's group returned to the St. Germain for one last night. Sir Malcolm had arranged for his private jet to fly from Marseilles to Paris, and he and his party were scheduled to leave from de Gaulle Airport the next morning. Meanwhile, the Countess, Blaise, and Gunther would return to Marseilles by Portkey later that day, while Bobby Latimer would drive Sirius back to London by car. Just before 10 o'clock, Harry retired to his room but was surprised to find a note on his pillow. Harry, meet me on the balcony at midnight. It's time. Serena Zabini. At the appointed hour, Harry silently left his room and made his way to the balcony that overlooked the Parisian skyline. The Eiffel Tower stood illuminated in the distance. The Countess Zabini was waiting for him, dressed in evening casual clothes with a bag hanging from her shoulder. Harry was glad he hadn't changed into pajamas yet. "Buonasera, Lord Wilkes," she said. "And to you, Countess. Please, call me Serena. We are now social peers, after all." "Harry, then. You wish to meet with me now?" "I did. There is much we must discuss, Harry. But not here. Tell me, have you ever sighed apparat before?" "I have. Though I am reluctant to let anyone just spirit me away in the middle of the night without telling anyone after the day I've already had." "Where is it you wish to take me?" "To perhaps the one place in all the world where we can truly talk without fear of being overheard." "I do not blame you for your caution, Harry. You've indeed had a trying day. And, well, I am a Zabini, and I know my reputation well. Sometimes, we cannot help but inspire distrust in others. It is the price we pay for our secrets. The most important of those secrets, I am now willing to share with you. Will you trust me long enough to hear what you need to know?" Harry studied her for a long time. While his legitimacy gave him no reason to fear the Countess, he was certain she was a skilled occlumens. He had learned from both Snape and Scrimger that his deductive abilities could be deceived with enough skill or training. But in the end, it didn't matter. He had come this far, and he believed she had answers for him. Answers he probably did not want to hear, and likely responses to questions he had not yet thought to ask, but answers nonetheless. He reached out and took Serena Zabini's arm. After a disorienting apparition, Harry found himself in a graveyard. "Where are we?" he asked cautiously, his wand already drawn. "Cimetière du Père-Lachaise," Serena replied. "Near the old Lestrange mausoleum." "Okay," Harry said. "I suppose that will make more sense when you explain why we are here." "We are here, Harry Black, because in 1927, Gellert Grindel did something extraordinary here. It was extraordinarily evil, but also remarkable from a magical perspective. In response, Nicholas Flamel did something equally extraordinary, again magically speaking. The after effects of that night affected this area, and especially the mausoleum, in ways that will be beneficial for us tonight." As she spoke, Serena led Harry through the graveyard and into the Lestrange mausoleum. Almost immediately, Harry felt a wave of discomfort wash over him. He noticed his scar itching slightly, but it showed no signs of its former rampage. Once inside, Serena produced a small electric torch from her bag and turned it on to light the way. Harry narrowed his eyes and pulled out his own wand. "Lumos." There was no effect. Serena glanced at him. "Due to the powerful and unnatural magic unleashed at night in 1927, this area is, for lack of a better term, magic-proof. Wand-based magic is not possible here." Harry raised an eyebrow. "What about potions?" She paused, surprised. "That's an interesting question. I honestly don't think anyone has ever tried to bring a cauldron here to test it." They continued until they entered a large chamber. It was circular, with a domed ceiling and many rows of stone benches facing down onto a round open area. The first thing Harry noticed was that every stone in the chamber had been bleached to a pale bluish-white, giving off an eerie luminescent glow. His discomfort deepened, and he gripped his wand tighter, even though it felt like a dead stick in his hand. The second thing Harry noticed was a large box in the center of the circular stage, roughly 10 by 10 meters, coated in pure gold. There was a single door on one side that resembled a bank vault door. "What is that supposed to be?" Harry asked. "We call it the vault," Serena replied. "It really needs no other name." Without another word, she strode up to the vault's door and reached into her purse to produce a small knife. Harry instinctively took a step back, but Serena ignored him. She used the knife to cut her own hand, smearing the blood over the door. After a moment, the bloodstain glowed bright red before fading away. Then, the wheel on the door began to spin, and the door slowly opened. "So what are you hiding in there?" Harry asked suspiciously. "A table and 2 chairs," Serena replied. "Shall we enter?" The witch led the way, with Harry following closely behind. To his surprise, the interior was much larger than it appeared from the outside, at least 30 feet across. In the center, there was indeed a circular table with a high-backed chair on either side. A chandelier hanging above. Once Harry was inside, Serena reached behind him to pull the vault's door shut. "Lumos," intoned the Countess as she flicked her wand, illuminating the chandelier. As soon as the door closed, Harry felt his connection with his wand return. He confirmed this by successfully casting a Lumos of his own. "So," he said, "we're in a room where magic works, in the middle of a building where magic doesn't. This seems overcomplicated as far as security measures go." "That would depend on who or what you want to stop from eavesdropping, Harry. The vault's exterior is coated with a thin layer of orichalcum that is 65% pure. It cost multiple fortunes and has been used by my family and our associates for decades for our most important divinations and our most sensitive discussions. It is a room that no magic known to us can penetrate, standing in the middle of a dead zone where no magic can function. If there is anything further that can be done to shield our discussions from the enemy, we do not know what it is." Harry blinked. "And who is this enemy?" "Someone who is always watching, always listening, and always waiting for a chance to act. But first things first. My Blaze says you have become proficient at maintaining multiple mind streams." "Yes. I am proficient, Harry replied, assuming that opening 7 independent minds, even if only for a few seconds, met that standard. Have you begun a study of the hidden mind technique? The boy frowned. He had dabbled with that technique, but not to a large degree. The hidden mind referred to the practice of locking away important information in a secondary persona that would lie dormant until activated. He had used it the previous January to meet with the headmaster while wearing a personality designed to be ignorant of Sirius Black's innocence and his rescue from Azkaban. I am familiar with the technique, he replied. Good, Serena said as she took a seat at the table and pulled a deck of tarot cards from her handbag. I recommend you open a secondary mind right now to retain all memories of our discussions. Do not allow your primary mind to recall our discussions when you leave this place. When we're done here, I will provide a recommended list of triggers for remembering when the time is right. Harry raised an eyebrow. Is all this really necessary? Who are you so afraid of? Not who, but what, Harry. The enemy is fate, and fate is already interested enough in you. So we will speak plainly here and then hide our discussions away in the deeper recesses of our minds. As long as we display no conscious memories on the outside, fate will not take steps to take those memories from us. Or perhaps do worse to us. Harry looked around as he took his own seat. But we're safe in here. From fate. We are in a room that no magic can penetrate, hidden in the center of an area in which no magic can function. If more than this is required to hide us from fate's attention, then doing so is impossible, and we would be better off accepting our doom. I decline to do so. The motto of House Zabini is Finche Respiriamo, Speriamo, or while we breathe, we hope. She passed the cards over to Harry. Now, we shall dispense with tea leaves this time and stick to more reliable techniques. Shuffle the cards until you feel comfortable and pass them back to me. After a moment's hesitation, Harry did as she asked. When he returned the deck, she cut the cards and began laying out a spread on the table. The spread design was more complicated than the simple 3x3 spread the Countess had used 2 years earlier to read Harry's fortune on his 12th birthday. He noticed the oddity of the cards themselves. Even though he had shuffled them thoroughly, all 16 cards came up as major arcana, which might have been a neat card trick or possibly just a harbinger of doom. Serena studied the spread carefully before giving Harry a piercing gaze. You are now the Prince of Slytherin, I take it. Harry stiffened in his chair. Before I say anything else, tell me what you know about that. I know everything and nothing, I'm afraid. She quickly recited the Potter prophecy in its entirety. Then, she explained how she came to know it. An ancestor of hers named Armand Zabini had overheard the prophecy and revealed it to his family's elders. They took on the mission of guarding the prophecy and preventing the apocalypse it foretold as a sacred family trust. Harry snorted. The Potters tried to do the same thing. It didn't work out too well for them. Serena shook her head. The Potters did all they could. But their approach was too direct. They focused solely on preventing the heralding lines from coming to pass, which was always futile. No matter what the Potter family has done over the last 2 centuries to stop it, when the time of the Dark God arrives, the two who should be as one will be set against each other in hatred, and the last Potter will rise as the Prince of Slytherin. I don't know precisely what the Prince of Slytherin means, except that it indicates a position of power within Slytherin House. Blaise knows but is bound from revealing the secret to me. She gestured toward the cards. I also know that you are the first Potter to be sorted into Slytherin since the prophecy was uttered. You are the first Potter in all that time to have even one sibling, let alone be born as twins who have a famously antagonistic relationship. The cards I have drawn to represent your recent past, the Magician, the Emperor, the Sun, the World, and the Fool, indicate that you have indeed come into your power and achieved the goals you set for yourself when I last read your cards. Except the Fool also tells me that you realized too late that achieving those goals might have been a terrible mistake. I suspect the fulfillment of an apocalyptic prophecy would fit that description. Harry glared at her, feeling frustrated. If you really wanted to avert this prophecy, maybe telling me about it before it was too late would have been a good first step. Serena shook her head. One cannot simply avert a true prophecy by direct action. Your father's attempts to do so likely led directly to its fulfillment. I suspect your own efforts to avert the prophecy were similarly unsuccessful. From what Blaise told me, you only revealed your sudden knowledge of the prophecy to him on the morning of March 26th. By the evening of March 28th, that part of the prophecy was fulfilled, presumably by your ascension. Blaise had to be careful because of the secrecy spells guarding the identity of the Prince of Slytherin, but he was able to communicate that much to me. Am I right in guessing you thought you'd found a way to avert the prophecy, but instead, you only accelerated it? Harry glared bitterly at her. He felt embarrassed that what he thought would be a decisive rejection of the Hydra throne instead proved to the Hydra his worthiness to claim it. He was also annoyed to realize how much Blaise had been watching him, even revealing his status as prince, no matter how indirectly. Serena noticed his mood. For whatever it's worth, Harry, let me assure you of one thing. My son Blaise is intensely loyal to you. Like the rest of my extended family, he feels a duty to fight against the prophecy. However, unless he believes that doing so threatens our family, he will follow you wherever your path leads. Then why didn't he do anything to stop me from becoming prince? Because he would have failed and possibly died in the attempt. Remember what I told you before. True prophecies want to come true. Once we suspected that you might be the one to trigger the prophecy, I instructed him to do nothing to interfere with you, lest fate notice him and take action against him. Destiny is paid for in blood, Harry said softly, recalling the ominous words that Serena had spoken to him in the summer of 1992. Indeed. The final two lines of the prophecy are what students of divination refer to as heralding lines. Your becoming the Prince of Slytherin marked the beginning of the rest of the prophecy at its appointed time. When the moment was right, the last Potter would become the Prince of Slytherin. If that moment is now, then anyone who tried to prevent your rise would suffer for it. Harry started rubbing his temples. So what's the point? Do you people want the prophecy to come true? Whether we want such a thing is irrelevant. The prophecy will come true. Our goal is to do whatever we can to ensure that the outcome is as favorable as possible. The only two outcomes I see are a choice between oblivion and damnation. Which is your preference? Oblivion, of course. Harry's eyes widened at how casually the Countess expressed her preference for the end of the world. For the first time since meeting her, the phrase death cult crossed his mind. Would you care to expand on that? He asked coolly. Gladly. But first, let us look back at the rest of your cards for context. Turning to the immediate future, we have the Wheel of Fortune inverted, Justice inverted, Strength, the Hanged Man, and the Lovers inverted. A dangerous conflict draws near, one you will be pulled into unfairly and against your will. While you will succeed in the challenges you face, even those successes may ultimately benefit your enemies. She paused and glanced back at the cards. Oh, and you will also experience complications of a romantic nature that will threaten to distract you from more important matters. Concerns. Harry sniffed. That's never been an issue for me before. You've never been a 14-year-old multimillionaire celebrity before either, Serena replied with a smirk. Honestly, if my Blaise were a girl, I'd have tried matchmaking by now. But as she turned back to the cards, her expression grew more serious. Looking farther ahead, we find the Devil, the Hierophant inverted, the Hermit inverted, and the Tower. A great evil is rising against you, likely the same dark wizard who will one day become a dark god. Perhaps Voldemort, perhaps someone else. You must be prepared for either possibility. You will experience both the loss of a powerful guardian figure and a time of forced seclusion, cut off from your allies and forced to rely solely on yourself. Ultimately, a time of destruction and catastrophe awaits you. Finally, she pointed to the last two cards. All of this leads to the end of your journey, death and judgment. I'm still not seeing any positive outcomes, Harry said blandly. On the contrary, she answered. I find these cards quite reassuring. Your journey does not end with death. That is the penultimate card. After death comes judgment. Honestly, if I had to choose between oblivion and damnation to the dark god's hell, I would choose the former because nothingness is preferable to eternal torment. She tapped the judgment card with a perfectly manicured finger. I believe that the presence of the judgment card falling after the death card implies a way through oblivion to whatever lies beyond it. Some of us will be judged worthy of a fate other than mere oblivion. There is something else waiting for us after the end of all things. You believe? So you don't have any proof of that? The witch smiled. As I told you, my family's motto is while we breathe, we hope. The last time we discussed matters of true prophecy, I told you that such prophecies are expressions of something that magic itself wants to take place. According to the prophecy, our future is a choice between oblivion and damnation. However, I do not believe that magic desires our destruction. It seems undecided about how to proceed. The prophecy must offer some means of salvation, otherwise, it serves no purpose. There must be a way, a difficult path that can be navigated, allowing at least some of us to survive. Given the wording of the prophecy, I do not think we are meant to choose the dark god as our way to survival. So, you're suggesting we choose death instead? She nodded. Yes, Harry. Of the two, death is the only one who might fight for us. As Harry's eyes narrowed, he felt the familiar sensation of a kaleidoscope locking into place. You're talking about the Deathly Hallows. You believe the legend that whoever reunites them becomes master of death? Yes. To truly master something is to become one with it in every way that matters. Tell me, Harry, do you know the tale of the three brothers? From Beedle the Bard? I've read it. Three brothers cross a river using magic. That apparently annoys Death so much that he gives them the Hallows, which leads to the death of two of them. Serena nodded. And what about the tale of the three sisters? Harry blinked. Three sisters. A legend from ancient China. When Death came in the form of the Yama King to claim the soul of Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor and China's first wizard king, his three daughters met the death god first to offer him hospitality. They danced and sang for him, offering rice wine and sticky buns laced with opium. Eventually, the Yama King fell asleep, and the three daughters stole his robe, his staff, and his ring. They then presented these items to their father on his deathbed. Huangdi used the talismans to restore his former vitality and then ascended to claim the throne of heaven as the august personage. Jade, she said. Okay. Or if you don't like that one, how about the tale of Hermes Trismegistos, Hermes thrice blessed, who earned his place among the gods of Olympus by sneaking into Hades and stealing Death's robe, scepter, and crown? Or Loki, who stole Hela's cloak, mace, and jeweled amulet to blackmail her into restoring Balder to life? Or Ishtar, who became queen of the Anunnaki after defeating the death goddess Ereshkigal and stripping her of her dress, her scepter, and the jewel that rested on her forehead? Or any of a dozen other stories I could recite from around the world, most of which have been erased from Muggle literature and wizarding literature by order of the International Magical Cooperation. Hold on! Harry exclaimed. Are all of those Deathly Hallows? The Countess shrugged. The true nature of the Hallows remains a mystery. Perhaps the differing descriptions are due to the tales changing over time, or perhaps the Hallows themselves have the power to change their own nature. Certainly, they have some ability to hide themselves given their history. We suspect that the Potter invisibility cloak is actually Death's cloak, handed down to the Potters centuries ago when the last daughter of House Peverell married into the Potter family. Her ancestor, centuries removed, was Ignatius Peverell, and he and his two siblings were reputed to be the three brothers by some theorists. The Countess sniffed disdainfully. Obviously, James Potter has never considered that, or else he would not let his son carry it about to use for pranks just as his own father once gifted it to him for equally frivolous purposes. But the tales that still exist, often in books the International Magical Cooperation deems illegal to own, all have remarkable similarities. 3 items, one a wooden stick or staff of some kind, one a stone usually set in jewelry, and one a flowing garment. All given by or taken from an avatar of death, granting power over death to anyone who acquires all 3. And why does the International Confederation of Wizards censor this? Are they afraid of wizards pursuing the Hallows? Yes. If there is any truth to the legend of the Hallows, the Confederation would certainly consider them too dangerous to be left unchecked. It doesn't help that several infamous dark wizards sought the Hallows, most recently Grindel, who claimed to be the master of the Elder Wand. Was he? Harry asked suspiciously. Very possibly. However, how Albus Dumbledore managed to defeat him in one-on-one combat remains a mystery if Grindel truly held the Death Stick as his personal wand. To be honest, my greatest fear has always been that the International Confederation of Wizards claimed the wand after his defeat and then either destroyed it or hid it away. In that case, this entire line of inquiry has wasted my family's time for nearly 200 years. Harry sat for a moment, reflecting on what the Countess had shared. If you believe Voldemort is the Dark God, I'm not the one meant to defeat him. That task belongs to Jim Potter. Perhaps your departure from the House of Potter might change things. It's possible that, by rising as prince, you have completed your role in the Potter prophecy. I suspect there is another prophecy governing the relationship between Jim Potter and Voldemort, but I do not know its details. Well, I do, Harry thought. But I'm not ready to share it, even if I weren't bound by oaths. How do you explain my being the last Potter? He asked instead. That is a simple matter, Serena said, waving her hand dismissively. My personal theory is that you and your brother were simply switched at birth. What? From what I have learned, your parents were not expecting twins, and neither were the healers at the time of your birth. It would have been an easy mistake for the Medwitch who took custody of you both immediately after you were born to mislabel you. The older twin had that I don't. Harry's eyes widened at the thought that the younger twin had been identified as the older one and vice versa. The possibility that someone had made a mistake and that he might never have been the Potter heir at all had not occurred to him. Such a mistake would be typical of the subtle manipulations fate can engineer in bringing about a true prophecy, she continued. Consider how James Potter has treated you for most of your life. Now imagine that you were identified as the younger son and thus without any of the protections guaranteed to an heir. Potter could have expelled you from the family in infancy and certainly would have immediately after your sorting. Harry sat still for a long time as he absorbed Serena's theory. It sounded plausible, but for some reason, it didn't feel right to him. He shook his head and moved on to another matter. Since we're sharing information, I suppose I should ask, are you aware that Sybil Trelawney has recently made another prophecy? This time, it was Serena's turn to show shock. Harry recited to her the prophecy that Hermione had related to him, the one that had led him to his misfired attempt to disclaim the Prince of Slytherin role. Until at last, the question is asked, and the decision is made, our story has been told before. But will it ever be told again? The Countess repeated the final line slowly. Interessante, she added. That's not the word I'd use, but okay, Harry said. Now what does it mean? Well, she said slowly, if my theory is correct, then this prophecy ties in with the first Potter prophecy. The question refers to the choice between damnation and oblivion, and the decision refers to the fact that the Prince of Slytherin will make it. With that, she tapped the judgment card again. Harry frowned. But the first prophecy doesn't guarantee that death will defeat the Dark God, only that theirs will be the last battle. Even assuming this refers to me, do you have any reason to think that I can win against a Dark God other than hope? What powers does the older twin have that I don't? The Master of Death, what can you do? Serena said reluctantly. To be honest, even this latest prophecy, while it addresses the Prince of Slytherin, does not clearly state that the Prince will also be the decider. So, other than what you've read in my cards tonight, you don't really have any guarantees that it's my job to defeat the Dark God and lead everyone to a happy afterlife? Harry asked. Again, no. There are no guarantees with a true prophecy. As you found out firsthand, they are always spoken at the right time and in front of the right people to provoke a response. No true prophecy is ever given to someone who will simply shrug it off and forget it. The most recent prophecy was given to you, and you reacted in a way that triggered the first Potter prophecy. I can't say for sure that you will be the one to master death, but you are high on my family's list of potential candidates. Aha, Harry said. And just how many people are on your list of potentials? Serena suddenly looked bashful. 17 at the moment. 17. Harry exclaimed. Reuniting the Hallows is not the only way to figuratively become deaf within the terms of the Potter prophecy. In my opinion, it is the most likely method, especially since your connection to the Potter invisibility cloak seems significant. But still, the Hallows are not the only option. Other members of my family are pursuing different leads. Aha. And how many candidates for Dark God are on your list? 53, she replied, causing Harry to cough in surprise. Though right now, the probability that the Dark God is either you-know-who or someone connected to him is so high that he occupies most of our attention. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. So, what do I do with all this? He finally asked. Do, she responded in surprise. Do nothing. If it is your destiny to reunite the Hallows and become the master of death, what can you do? Death, in time, the Hallows will come to you. For now, you are still young. Study your lessons. Continue to hone your skills. Enjoy your time with friends and family. Restore the name of Wilkes to respectability. And, I suppose, do whatever it is that the Prince of Slytherin is supposed to be doing. The boy frowned. It is really not in my nature to sit back and wait for things to happen. Of course not, Serena replied with a laugh. Fate would never have chosen you if it were. By 2 in the morning, Harry was back in his room and finally in bed. He was not quite asleep yet, but in a light meditative state. He and the Countess had talked for another half hour before Harry locked away the most important secrets in a secondary mind, along with a half-dozen events that could trigger his primary mind to remember everything. One of those events was entering a meditative state right on the verge of sleep, which would allow him to psychically talk with himself. According to the Countess, fate took no notice of what forbidden thoughts occurred in dreams. As long as Harry didn't wake up fully, he could enter a sleep cycle just light enough to think about things without drawing unhealthy attention. When he asked for an explanation of what that meant, the Countess only said that one of her associates had to lock away important knowledge about him to avoid a type of supernatural attack she had never experienced before, which she feared might have been fatal. What sort of knowledge about me? Harry asked nervously. The fact that the scar on your head is in the form of a Sawilo rune and was almost certainly placed there deliberately, either by someone as part of a ritual or by something as a manifestation of your latent power and of fate's interest in you. After that, Harry quickly lost interest in further discussion about his scar. He followed Serena's recommendation to lock that bit of knowledge as deeply as possible and share it with no one else. While he nominally trusted Serena's opinion, he was still too shaken by the afternoon's events. Harry wanted to avoid any further strangeness related to his scar. He still didn't know much about the rest of Serena's associates, whom he suspected might be better described as cultists. He wondered how many of them would assume the worst if they discovered he had an evil scar shaped like the Norse rune of power, one that seemed intent on harming him. Just before he fell asleep, a thought crossed his mind that felt trivial compared to the significance of his meeting with the Countess, yet it lingered. He thought to himself, I completely forgot to ask about Fleur Delica. Damn it! She better not be my romantic complication,